there's a prohibition going against ranchers. We've lost over, I'd say, 40% of our ranch land.
Where's the ranch land going?
Billionaires.
Bill Gates is probably one of the biggest names I hear thrown around farmland and food.
There's videos of him saying you're not going to eat meat anymore. Rapeseed, guess what it is? It's canola oil. It can be the oil in your car, or you can fry your French fries with it. You can look at our health and the devaluation of our dollar and the amount of fake commodities injected into our food supply. It's the same damn chart.
They're trying to remove meat from the children's diets in the schools. Just leave the kids the fuck alone.
Our kids, 46% of them are obese or overweight. 1 out of 2 is going to diabetes or already has diabetes. That is a fucking genocide. That's where we say no more.
All right, guys, bang, bang. I'm very excited. Texas Slim here in the house. I think a great place to start this conversation about what the hell is going wrong with the food supply is just how the food supply works. And so if we look at cattle as an example, I know that you have the beef initiative, and I think that's probably a good place for us to start.
Right.
There's cattle on a ranch, and somehow I eat at home. How do we get from cattle on a ranch to me eating at home? And less about the problems, but just like, what does that process look like for those that don't understand how the food supply works?
Well, one thing it's basically daunting to start off with, but it used to not be daunting as far as every one of those touch points of our food supply. Let's just say pure animal protein right now.
Okay.
Livestock, either it be beef or fowl or hog, whatever it is. Pure animal protein has basically been so centralized now that you have so many touch points along that market access that a lot of people don't even good intentional people that are trying to pay attention, they don't understand the complexities of that. And that's been going on for, several decades now, but the last decade has really kind of been very, it's hindered our way of understanding what food is anymore.
So that food supply is getting more complex with more and more touch points. What's driving that? Is that like a capitalism thing where more people are trying to put their hand in the cookie jar and extract value? Is it a regulation thing? What's driving it?
Yeah, I would say basically coming from where I do as far as agriculture and ranching, it's basically been a combination of a regulatory capture for one, and then people that know how to basically manipulate the regulations that are put into place. You have some corruption, you have some manipulation, you have some global movements, of course, that we know about. They all kind of combine, and the last person that's really being thought of is the consumer and the rancher, the producer. And so to say that, it's like you have this movement that's been going on. We've had 4 major food consolidations on the global corporate level since 1992, 95, when NAFTA kind of kicked in. So saying that, they're pushing for a one world food group, and they're trying to basically compartmentalize the understanding of food and then actually the market access of that food, so where they can have more control over our nutrition, our food, our access to food from supply chain lines. And I think that's being exposed right now, that it's kind of a broken system, and they're trying to grab even more control right now as far as the consumer itself.
Got it. So we go to the consumers in terms of where we are in America. It's like 45% of Americans are obese, 70+% are overweight.
Yeah.
And some of that,
1 out of 2 is diabetic.
Insane.
Yeah.
And so some of that is obviously people live a sedentary lifestyle. Like, there's a bunch of things that feed into it, but the food supply is a huge piece of it. And so if we go all the way back to where this starts, right, and we look at these animal proteins, what are the ranchers doing, or kind of these initial food supply kind of insertion points, if you will? What are they doing with the food? And if we were simply to go buy it directly from them, what would be the difference between that food versus once it gets on the other end of the food supply?
Well, what you have now, you have ranchers, and that's a broad spectrum of ranchers or animal producers, right? You have cow-calf operators. You have somebody that brings a calf all the way to, adulthood, to where it does get harvested, and so they steward that animal, they steward the land all the way through. And then you have some ranchers and animal producers that'll take that cow-calf to a certain level, and then they basically have to get rid of it because the profits are controlled, the margins are controlled by 4 major global processors. Those processors, of course, are JBS, National, Tyson, and Cargill. And so what happens is that they don't have a say-so after they sell that cow. Once it goes into we call them the packer, feeders, processors. Once they get into that feedlot apparatus, then they're basically fed grains. They're given antibiotics. Some of them are given steroids. You just don't know. And a lot of that type of input that is given into that cow is not always reported to the consumer themselves. That's part of the regulatory capture. It involves the FDA, it involves the USDA. And so the rancher producer doesn't have a say in that. And they have to go ahead and get rid of that cow at that point in time because they have to have that cow processed.
So it's a dumb question, but on the animal protein side, we've got people who essentially go birth to like adolescence.
Right.
It's kind of the way I think of it. And then someone else takes it from adolescence to adulthood.
It's a good way to put it.
And then from adulthood, okay, now we're going to go give it to the 4 processors.
Right.
And whatever they do from there, they almost in some way are essentially taking an animal that usually 1 or 2 kind of ranchers have stewarded it, to use your word, to this point. And then from there, that's where a lot of kind of the nasty stuff is happening. And then the animal's ultimately killed, cut up, and then sent to a grocery store or whatever for the consumer.
100%. And you know what? I'll give 2 kind of comparisons here so we can kind of clarify. You have the cow-calf, you have the feedlot cow. You have a commodity cowboy. There's a lot of things that we basically refer to in the ranching industry. What kind of producer are you? And then you have the regenerative. Regenerative basically means from the soil to the grass to the cow to the producer, then to the processor, then to the supplier, then to our forks, us as the consumers. That's kind of a decentralized vertical integration back into how we used to basically raise, steward, harvest, and consume that cow. Right now, once we get to that processing point, that's the 4 major global processors. They process over 80% of our animal protein in the United States right now. And they get to have a big say about what type of cattle that they are bringing in, what type of labels they can put on our beef, let's say, like USDA Prime. That doesn't mean anything anymore. We don't know where that cow is coming from.
What did it used to mean?
It used to mean that this was U.S. beef, that we are the best cattle producers in the world. We have proven that. And it really all started in Texas in the late 1800s. And so we have a protocol that we did know how to grow the best beef in the world. Part of that stewardship, part of that basically harvesting of the animals themselves, the lands that are used, that's all been kind of globalized. And we, the consumer, are not understanding of what has taken place. But the ranchers do know because there's a prohibition going against ranchers. We've lost over, I'd say 40% of our ranch land in the last, let's say less than 2 decades, even worse in the last decade itself.
Where's the ranch land going?
Billionaires, wherever you want, So
this is like
you have a lot of people selling out these days because, we know real estate, we know land values. They're getting out of the system because they're having to rely on those processors. Their margins on those cows are very minimal. In the past, like you said, if they were able to take that cow all the way to your fork, their profit margins, they triple. They quadruple. That way they have power. Now they don't have a voice, a digital voice, or they don't have a voice in basically the market access that we started this conversation with.
So if we go back 1800s up until, a couple decades ago, you mentioned this kind of decentralized model, which was a local rancher would be there to raise the animal. It would go to a local producer. It would go to a local supplier, and then it eventually would end up on your plate at your house. And there were a network of these throughout the entire country.
You bet.
And over time, what we saw, as we've seen in many other industries, but this one is important because it's food that we're consuming, there was consolidation. Yeah. And when you look at that kind of supply system, the place that the consolidation has happened and is most egregious is at the producer level, right? It's basically people have gone in, they've created these 4 major producers. Now,
processors.
I'm sorry. And so if we go back and we think of, let's start with the land first. I remember the first time that I got tipped off to, hey, there might be a problem here, is I was reading Ted Turner, the founder of CNN's book, and quite entertaining, frankly, kind of a tip of the cap to an entrepreneur who saw a market opportunity and said, hey, I'm going to go and I'm going to build out this whole news thing, and made a bunch of money doing it. He then got into land ownership and I believe is still today the largest bison owner in North America. And so when you say, wait a minute, one of the folks who was an entrepreneur and, kind of the equivalent of what is today the technology industry, he was on the forefront of the media industry. What is he doing buying up land and bison? Now, his argument was that there's going to be this food crisis and we need to make sure that there's kind of a resurgence of these animals and things like that. If we start there, how big of a problem is that? Or are we actually happy that folks like a Ted Turner are going up and buying all this land and trying to create such a larger animal population?
No, it's not a good thing. It's
Okay.
not to It's not a good thing to consolidate basically the vertical integration that gave us the health in which we strived with. And whenever you have that major consolidation of land and of livestock, and then basically of how that livestock gets stewarded and processed, that is way too much control in too few hands. And if you look back, and I always tell everybody, look at how your grandfather used to live. Maybe it's your great grandfather, right? But what my grandfather did is that he had a farm ranch. He stewarded land and the animal itself. What he did is exactly what you said. He's like, okay, I'm gonna raise this cow to a certain level, then I'm gonna go have it processed. He fed his family first, and then he fed the community. Small Texas town, let's say that. Small Texas town had a small microprocessor, an abattoir. Well, that community said, okay, well, we have this abattoir, we have a butcher, we have a grocery store perhaps, and so that local produce, that local animal was sold to the local community, and it was decentralized. It was a two-party system. It was a peer-to-peer transactional system that the community basically agreed to themselves. And if you look at food and where it comes from, most people say you should be eating where you're standing, food from where you're standing. And that's what, America, basically, that's how we got started in the 1800s. Texas fed the nation at some time. Basically, after 1878, Texas started feeding cattle to the United States.
Okay, why did they do that?
Well, you had the Civil War, right? And then you'd had Texas became a nation, then it became a state. And then in Texas, we had the Comanche Wars. We had a lot of conflict that was still going. By 1878, all of that had ended.
Okay.
The Comanche Wars had stopped. We had full access to the state. And then all of a sudden, we had all these cattle that were roaming around the state of Texas. And so you created the cowboy, which came from the vaquero from Mexico. So you look at that and they say, well, wait, we have all of this food. How are we going to deliver this food, and where are we going to deliver it to? Well, we had the railroad that's really started going east and west and north and south. Well, then you had the cowboys started the cattle drive, and we started feeding military bases across the United States, some in the Southwest, some in the East. And so these cattle drives and the railroad system itself would deliver this pure animal protein. And then we started delivering to places like Kansas City, Chicago, New York. And we fed a nation at that time. And what I'm doing with the beef initiative is saying, okay, we fed the nation in 1878. That's when this started. We're going to do it again the way we used to do it, because we've been captured. The rancher has been captured, and our consumption models have been captured in a way that is nutritionally starving us now.
You said something to me recently that just blew my mind, which is a large portion of the beef in the United States of America is not consumed by the American consumer. It's actually shipped elsewhere.
Yeah.
I think that will shock many people who hear that, as it shocked me. What is going on there? Why is American beef being shipped elsewhere? And then what does that mean in terms of the beef that we're consuming?
Sure. Well, what I usually do to help clarify that, you look at how much beef is imported into the United States, and we'll go back to JBS, one of the processors. Okay, they've been, we'll cover them a little bit later, but I call it the Brazilian cattle drive. You have a cow that starts on grass in Brazil. Throughout its life, it makes it all the way to Mexico. It gets fed grains. It gets to America, and then it gets processed, and then it gets to have that stamp of USDA Prime put on it. Well, in San Antonio, I can't remember exactly the processing center, and I won't call them out because it's not the smart thing to do, but they did a genetic test on some ground beef, okay? Well, they found that ground beef had over 80 sets of genetics in that ground beef. That's 80 different cows was in that batch of ground beef. It's not one cow, it was 80 different cows. Okay, so that Brazilian cattle drive is part of that import that comes into the United States. Here in Texas, what happens is that's the market access from that beef from Brazil gets spread out to the wholesale market. So Texans are eating actually beef from Brazil, Africa, other places. In the beginning, I told you that, we grow the best beef and we harvest the best beef in the world. The United States does. A lot of that definitely comes from Texas because of its history. Well, a lot of that beef is sold on the global market to the highest bidder. And the ranchers and producers don't have any control of that. It's the processors that are the global processors, packers, and distributors.
When you say that it's the best beef, help people understand what exactly makes up the best beef, right? So if you were to look at, let's say, the Brazilian cow versus something here in the United States, like what makes it better?
Well, you look at technology and we say, technology is bad for food. No, it's really not. I mean, we've always been at the forefront of genetics, of knowing how to raise the right bred of beef. You have your Angus, you have, the Charolais, we used to have the Longhorn. You have all kinds of different breeds of cattle. Well, the United States has always been at the forefront of understanding, certain geographical areas, breeds of cattle. So our technology that we have invested in the cow itself is by far the best in the world that's ever happened. So with that type of technology and that type of intelligence that we've invested into the cow itself, well, we get to spread that out towards the world, the whole world. We get to, you think China has basically studied the cow like we have? No, but they're getting to buy the best beef. And so you have that type of apparatus to where we've done all the research and the development. We've done the proof of work. And now these global processing centers are taking our proof of work and they're sharing it to the highest bidder across the world. And once again, we, the consumer, and we, the rancher, don't have a say in that. And because of the regulatory capture, because of the amount of global money that is involved in making sure that highest bidder gets that Texas beef or the United States beef.
Yeah. So it makes sense to me that if I am the processor and I basically go to the global market and I say, who will pay me the most, right, for my best product?
Sure.
We may not like it, but that's just how economics work. That's how capitalism works, right? Is they're going to go auction it off for the highest bidder. What I don't understand is the cow or cattle that starts off in Brazil, that kind of cattle drive, if you will, to the United States. Is there money kind of to follow, and that's why they're doing it? Is basically now that rancher or somebody along that line, they're trying to get ultimately to the United States and have it processed in the U.S. because they actually make more money?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that cow that comes from Brazil, I call them touch points. Okay, that cow from Brazil is going to have probably about 20 touch points before it hits your fork. Okay, so how many people made money in those touch points? And a lot of times the packer gets to decide that, the processor gets to decide that, and the distributor gets to decide that because they're all the same global corporation. Okay, if you do a regenerative rancher producer, basically you're going to have two touch points. You're going to have me and the rancher, you and me, the rancher. And so if you have those two touch points, who's making the money? Okay, well, you, the consumer, is getting a high value quality item that you know exactly where it came from. the rancher is saying, okay, instead of $300 off of this cow, I can basically cut this cow up and make all kinds of cool steaks. And I can actually, my margins go from $300 to $400 a cow to maybe $2,000 a cow. That money goes back into the land, it goes back into the cow itself, and it goes to the rancher so he can maintain his legacy, create a pillar of strength that he doesn't have right now, but he used to have in the beginning. But the global processors took that away, distributed those touch points to other people making those profit margins.
You mentioned earlier that ground beef, there's been these genetic tests.
Yeah.
It kind of, it's like a surprise audit, right? Of like, hey, what is actually in here?
Yeah.
And there was 80 or around 80 pieces of genetic information in there, meaning 80 different cows. What is the problem for those that don't understand in terms of if it was just ground beef from one cow versus 80? Is it complexity? And so if any one of those 80 cows has something wrong with it, got steroids, had some sort of treatment along the way, then it kind of poisons the other 79? Or is there other things to consider?
Well, I mean, you just made me think of a kind of a comparison. Let's get 80 hamburgers from 80 different fast food joints. Let's blend them all up and then let's make a new hamburger. Okay, are you going to trust that hamburger? You shouldn't already because it's coming from fast food. But anyways, if you get that much, variety within consumption of food, you really think that consumption model is pure? Do you really think that food is pure? If you got 80 different cattle in a pound of ground beef, how can you track down the complexities of what could go wrong with that beef and how many chemicals are in that beef? What have they included into that beef to make it to where you think it's USDA prime? Well, there's a lot of unknowns there, right? And if you are basically eating a random consumption model, well, your health is random at this time.
So we talked a little bit about Ted Turner, obviously going and consolidating farmland. And we've talked a little bit about the processors, getting this kind of 4 companies that really have created somewhat of a monopoly on the market across those 4 players. Bill Gates is probably one of the biggest names I hear thrown around farmland and food. Let's start with the farmland purchases that he's made. I think he is the single largest landowner in all of North America, farmland in North America. Is it just, hey, nobody should have that much farmland, and so that's the problem, or are there other things to consider when I hear people talking about Bill Gates?
I wouldn't say, because we live in America. I mean, you can, if you can afford it, you should be able to own it and steward it, right? Well, with his actions and what he does on a global scale, you can look at, he's got so many shell companies. Cascade Investments, I think, is his investment company that goes in his LLC, where he can go and acquire all this land. And if you look what he's trying to do at this particular time, I think he's got investments in, I don't know, from 5 to 13 fake meat companies. And so you look at what his narrative is and basically what his intentionalities are. You're looking at him basically taking animal protein out of the American consumption model. And he doesn't hold back. He said, this is how we're going to eat. There's videos of him saying, you're not going to eat meat anymore. You're going to eat this vegetable protein. And we know it doesn't actually... We've got the texture down. We've got the look down. It doesn't quite taste like it should be, like you desire, but we're almost there. So you will be eating this. And so if you look at what his intentionalities are, it is to own as much land as he can and to not let it basically steward animals in the way that got us here.
So the concern is if he buys up, let's just use the extreme example, if he bought up all the farmland in America and he was the sole farmland owner, he could, on a whim, say, we're not going to do this anymore. Now these other companies that I have invested in that are making kind of genetic engineered meat, which again isn't meat, but is being positioned that way, he essentially would be able to cut off the supply of kind of the traditional animal proteins and then force people to adopt this new genetically engineered one.
100%. I mean, if you kind of look around and if you're on Twitter, Bitcoin Twitter, you see a lot of things that are happening. Well, all these processing centers that have gone up in flames. Okay, and I keep on saying we're going through a global industrial food shift. Well, what does that mean? Well, from the ground level, the industry is changing, and he's part of driving that model of the global industrial food shift. Well, you look at processing centers. Once again, I say that, and you look about probably since especially the last 10 years, but especially since 2017 and 2018, one of the biggest investors in new processing centers that do not include the animal themselves, they're a new form of processing center, are the processing centers themselves, JBS, Tyson, National, and Cargill. Well, if those guys are processing all of our animal protein, okay, and they're building new processing centers that will actually take the animal and the soil out of those processing centers and go to an even more ultra-processed food model. Well, Bill Gates is lockstep and barrel with them at the same time. And that's part of the global industrial food shift that we're seeing. And we've seen those in our time. We saw them after 1971. What the F happened in 1971? Well, the dollar got debased. Well, our food got debased. And when it got debased, they introduced new fake commodities into our consumption models. That's what's happening with Bill Gates.
What is their argument, right? So if I was to go talk to Gates or somebody else and I said, hey, why are you doing this?
Climate change.
Okay, climate change is like the driver. Okay, explain more in terms of like what argument are they making around climate change?
Well, of course, if you look at climate change and how it's always been manipulated for certain reasons, I've grown up, I'm generational X. First, we were going to freeze to death. Now we're going to burn to death. It's always some type of decade, type of PsyOp that they're doing within, our understanding of what climate change is. What they've done now is they were looking at carbon. They're looking at, carbon hazards. What is causing this climate change? Well, it's too much carbon. But what they're really not telling you is that the soil has been destroyed by the chemicals in which we've been using, especially in the last 50 years since 1971. And so what they do is they create a narrative. They create a global marketing plan saying, well, climate change is because of cows. And now, on the UN basically platform, and as far as the globalists, they do consider the cow a carbon hazard.
Is that because of cow farts? Is that
well, it's actually cow burps, but they use cow burps. Yeah,
farts sound better than burps.
Yeah,
I guess.
It's methane, and everything like that. Exactly. But what that's once again they exploit ignorance of the cow itself, and so that's a distraction that they get the public to look at, saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm not going to eat beef anymore. I'm going to be a vegan because the cow is bad for the planet, and I want to be a good steward of the planet."
What is insane to me, I read a study previously, and we can link to it, which stated that if you give cows in their feed seaweed, it will drastically reduce the methane output, and so cow farts, burps, etc., drastically are reduced. And so, let's just say on one side of the extreme, you have like, let's not touch cows anymore. Let's move to, genetically engineered food. Let's all go vegan and essentially abandon what humans have done for literally centuries.
Ever. Yes.
Instead, why don't we just figure out how to make them stop burping or farting?
Well, it's not the issue, though. And that's the problem. See, we're validating what they're making up as the propaganda. That has nothing to do with what's going on with climate, with carbon.
Explain what you think is going on.
What's going on is we've killed the soil.
Okay. In what way?
With herbicides and pesticides. The chemical companies you look at after World War II, and we'll kind of build into what's going on right now globally on a macro level. After World War II, what we did is we quit making bombs and we started making fertilizer. Okay, and it was a good thing. It's like, hey, we got this nitrogen. We can actually make these plants grow a lot faster. They can battle droughts. They can do a lot of things. And so it started out with well intentions, and we did. They went out to the farmer like Will Harris with White Oak Pastures, and we're having a conference there, a summit. But he told me a story about his father. The guy shows up and he had a bunch of fertilizer. He goes, "I'm going to pour this on your crop, and I'm not not going to pour it on this part of your crop. And I'm going to come back in about, a week, and then we're going to talk again. Well, within that week, that crop had grown exponentially more. It got all this really good fertilizer, and all of a sudden we were onto something as a nation. And who was driving that was the chemical companies, okay? And so as we've evolved in time, in 1971, we still had the micro farms. We still had my grandfather that stewarded land, fed his community. Eric Butts, the ag commissioner under Nixon, came out and he said, guess what? We're going to go big or you're going to go home. And what he meant, he said, you're going to do one crop and you're going to go fence to fence because we have all this new technology of chemicals. Basically, it was the herbicides, the pesticides, the fertilizers. And so then they said, we're going to feed the world. And we're the United States of America. We have won, and we're going to show everybody. It was part of battling Russia and communism. It's like we do need to sustain our communities, and we need to help out the rest of the world. Great, let's do it, right? Well, they have failed. And how they have failed is that by doing that and by doing this high production model of monocropping our food, they've basically destroyed our soil to where we have to genetically modify our seeds more. We have to use new chemicals to make those plants grow, and we can't rely on the soil like we did from the beginning.
So if I try to break this down in the most elementary way, it started out with the seeds that you would put into the soil were those seeds that we'd been using for
heirloom seeds,
centuries, right?
Right.
And the idea originally was take the fertilizer, put it on top of the seeds in the soil, and we would get a more efficient harvest.
Right.
And it would not only be more efficient in terms of time, but also the output could be more from an actual aggregate amount. And so if we're getting more harvest in terms of frequency and larger harvest each time, obviously that seems amazing, right? There's more food, it's more plentiful, all this stuff. But it didn't stop there.
No.
And then this is where we get, okay, well, if we put fertilizer, we get, X amount of improvement. What if we then start to try to address quote unquote problems? So this is where the pesticides and herbicides come in. Explain a little bit more in terms of what was the original thought process behind introducing those? And then what is, kind of with hindsight bias on our side, like what is the analysis as to whether those have been good or bad, or what is the impact there?
Well, you're asking the right person, but I've known a lot of people in the agricultural business, and the dependency is of those chemicals in which we have stewarded our land, our farms, our ranchers. It's some evil bullshit. It didn't start out being that way, but throughout time, you've got chemical companies that basically invented Agent Orange that are actually invented Roundup, which is glyphosate. And so you use glyphosate and you do studies on glyphosate, and you look at, the chemical companies that basically engineer glyphosate. Well, guess what? It's poison to humans. It's poison to the ground. It's poison. And by saying that, the chemical companies in the beginning, once again, they were something that was beneficial. But now you look at how they have changed and how they've leveraged into everything that we touch, throughout the last 50 years, it's greed, 100%. And they basically take the understanding and the clarity of how we got here, the source of the seed of how we got here, they now own. It's a power play. I wrote The Harvest of Deception, that first article that I wrote, and you really break down, where does the seed come from? Where did it come from in the past? And where is it now? Well, basically, our seed is not the heirloom seed anymore. It is a genetically modified seed that basically the grain companies and the chemical companies own and possess.
I want to understand this better because in this piece, you specifically talk about something called a rapeseed, I think it's called.
Yeah.
From my understanding is that's what was used for decades and decades, if not centuries. And at some point it gets banned. And
1956 by the FDA for human consumption.
Okay. And now we have these genetically modified versions. Describe a little bit in terms of what are the differences between the seeds and why did the FDA step in and actually say, hey, the seed that we've been using for so long no longer is allowed for human consumption?
Okay, the rapeseed, everybody should know, rapeseed, it's a freaking weed, but guess what it is? It's canola oil. That's what we call canola oil, is rapeseed. 1956, the FDA outlawed it because it was toxic to human consumption. Well, once again, we get into modifying a seed. That creates business. That creates profits. Okay, then once we've modified that seed into something, well, what are we trying to get rid of here? As far as, big ag, the grain companies, well, they're not using the grass to basically steward animals. What they're doing is now we can grow these grains in a way that we can actually, use to feed these cattle, right? And so what you do is you get a chemical company that basically goes in there and lobbies to say, hey, we need to get rid of animal fats out of our diets. And it goes back to a story of 1954 when Eisenhower had a heart attack. Heart attacks really didn't happen, but they needed to find the cause of heart disease. We had a guy named Ansel Keys, and he came out and he created a big study, and it's basically it was a bureaucratic kind of an attempt to influence lobbyists and politicians. And so they really started saying that animal fat was bad for you. Okay, if animal fat is going to cause heart disease and clog your arteries, we have to have a solution. And so they looked at vegetable oil and they said, okay, well, how can we make this vegetable oil? Well, rapeseed grows very easily. It's kind of a weed, but it's kind of toxic. Let's take out the uric acid. Okay, let's industrialize this seed in a way to where we can make it to where, I can run oil. It can be the oil in your car, or you can fry your French fries with it. And that's what we've accomplished. And so now that you had the big seed oil movement that's really, really started taking off once again, 1971, we devalued our dollar as a way that we could devalue our food by injecting a new fake commodity into our consumption. And it has a lot of varieties in which it can be used. One of it is they can inject it in candy bars, crackers, hamburger meat, the buns of a hamburger. So now it's becoming a commodity that is subsidized by the United States government. And so a lot of farmers will go in there and basically farm rapeseed so they can stay in business.
So what happened is the seed itself was a natural thing that had been used forever. And then we decided to still use a type of it. It's just one that we have genetically modified.
Right.
And rather than it stay in kind of its little corner of the world in terms of its uses, we essentially have exported in some way to the entire economy. And so much of our food now actually contains all of these oils. And that's how we cook food. That's how we treat certain things. I believe that it's even found in various other types of products that you use on a day-to-day basis. And so when you go and you look at that, how much of those types of changes around the genetically modified seeds and the grain that is actually fed to the animals is then linked to where we started earlier with 45% of Americans are obese and 70+% are overweight. Is there like a direct connection between literally the food you're consuming is because we've genetically modified all this stuff? You bet,
100%. And it's foolproof. And how you can, especially, I always refer to Bitcoin Twitter, there's a lot of researchers in there, and they, you'll see these pictures of people on the beach in 1969 and 1970. Everybody is fit. Everybody is healthy. Everybody's just, really collectively as a group of people, you can see a society that was basically healthy. And at that time, we had animal fats, we had pure animal protein, we had market access to a different food system. In the 70s, if you look at the 70s, it's a lot like what we're going through now. You had an economy crash, we had gas shortages, you had a lot of prohibition against certain things. Well, at that same time is when we did invest into this new fake commodity system. If you look at 1971, the health of a nation, and you look at the amount of, let's say, seed oils that have been injected with high fructose corn syrup, highly processed foods, basically, into our consumption. You can look at our health and the devaluation of our dollar and the amount of fake commodities injected into our food supply. It's the same damn chart.
Yeah.
And you can really, it's hard to question. It's hard to say, no, it's not. And, you brought it up with, over 70% of Americans being obese and overweight, diabetic, metabolic bankruptcy is what we've got. It's only a 50-year window. We weren't like that before 1971.
And when we look at this, you've mentioned fake commodity a couple of times. And what's so fascinating about it is in some ways, people may actually understand, hey, I'm eating something that is fake, right? If you go and you buy a candy bar or something and it's obvious that that did not grow in the ground, somebody somewhere along the way made that. Tastes great, but probably not healthy for you. And so I categorize some food as just like, it's very obvious that this is manufactured, processed, all that. But there is a large portion of the population who actually believes that they are eating quote unquote healthy. Right. But what you're really uncovering here is you may be eating some sort of beef, but it could have come from an animal that was eating genetically modified seeds. And do people know that? Or is there any way for them, if I go to the store and I look at the beef that I'm about to buy, do they have a big label on it that says, hey, this animal was fed genetically modified seeds?
No, and that's what's happened, you know, especially with the labeling laws and how the FDA basically is a gatekeeper to chemicals that are injected into our food supplies. And I'll do on 2 touch points, and I think you and I talked about this earlier, is, you know, October of 21 last year, basically the FDA won a lawsuit, and it's under the Gross rule, generally recognized as safe. That's what they use and they leverage. Well, what that means is that the FDA can say, hey, you know, we've got these chemicals that we use in the science of food. You know, they love to use the word food science. And so in October of last year, they won a lawsuit to where they can inject thousands of new chemicals into our food under the Gross rule, and they don't have to tell us what it is. And so labeling laws, of course, we talked about GMO. Well, we've all seen it. We've all, you know, it's always there, genetically modified, right? That's what that means. Well, now they've even changed genetically modified to bioengineered, and it's a barcode on your food packaging.
So now they won't actually put the GMO label on it. No. They instead will
bioengineered.
You have to go actually scan the barcode.
Yes.
With like your cell phone or something. Yep. And if you scan the barcode with your like an app on your phone, then it will tell you that it's been genetically modified.
It'll be bioengineered. They're really kicking in the bioengineering.
Sounds cooler.
It does. Yeah, it's very scientific. And so, but you look at that, okay, and that happened at the same time, fall of 2021, the labeling laws changed, and the FDA says, sure, go ahead and put 2,000 new chemicals into the food supply in 2022.
You mentioned the generally
recognized as safe. Yeah.
Nothing is general when it comes to regulation.
That laughable, man? That's clown world stuff, man.
Yes. So explain a little bit more. What is the intention of this regulation?
I think it's so they can confuse the consumer, man. Why else would they want? And they can inject you think about each chemical that they get to put into our food supply. Okay, now let's break that down as those touch points that we talked about the cattle. That's massive profit on a global scale that they get to inject, and you become the recycling bin of that, basically, of that chemical that they get to put in there. And that chemical could be all kinds of different things, nanotechnology, particles, who knows what it is anymore. But by saying that each chemical is basically making profits, it has a budget, it has a plan, you know, and that's how each one of those chemicals, if we are the recycling bin of those chemicals, it's foolproof. Why wouldn't they do it? It's business. It's big global business, man. We're talking about profits here. We're not talking about nutritional value. That's out the door because Americans don't care about nutritional value. And if they do, even their best intentions is not going to get them to health, because it's basically a hamster wheel of people chasing health anymore. And you have to go deeper. You have to get into a level of food intelligence that actually has to be more intentional, and it can't be random anymore.
So if I go to the grocery store, can I eat food from there that is not genetically modified?
You can.
Okay.
But what I usually tell people, and I think a lot of people hear it, don't shop in the inside aisles. That's where you should not be, because that's where most of the processed food lies. Shop on the corners, shop on the outside walls where you have
fruits,
your meats,
vegetables,
vegetables and meats, and your dairies and whatever. But, you know, I don't, very little of my consumption comes from the supermarkets anymore. But I've been doing this for a while, and how I was raised is I don't like, you go into a supermarket now, it looks like a cartoon world. Think about that.
Yes,
go
true.
walk up and go film it, and then go back and watch the film as you walk down the aisles. How many colors? How many animation pictures do you see? How much manipulation is being fed into your brain? It's like, oh, heart healthy, and it's got a wonderful picture, and somebody's very happy and in peace. And think about the manipulation that goes on with marketing, advertising, injecting chemicals into your food supply, and you are the person who gets to recycle every bit of it, from audio to video to the food itself. You are the test subject, and they make you feel good about it because it tastes good.
I'm actually shocked that cancel culture made its way into the grocery store, and they started to cancel some people who were on the boxes.
Right.
But that happened. So you go to the grocery store. I think a lot of people hear this say, all right, cool, I got it.
Well, I went last night.
Food
I went to
system
Publix.
screwed up.
Yeah.
What do you do when you go? You shop around the edges of the grocery store. You avoid the middle. What does a normal diet look like? Like when you say that, hey, I'm not going to give health advice, right? Everyone's body is different.
Right.
But how do you think about putting food in your body when you're traveling and not at home?
Right. The source of the seed of my nutrition is pure animal protein. It's that simple. But that's how I was raised. We were raised we had a freezer full of beef. At any time, you had market access to that beef. 5 years old, I'm cooking hamburgers from a local rancher, right, or from grandfather, whatever. And so that is the source of the seed of basically how I look at food right now, especially in the United States of America. It's like yesterday I went and I got in, flew in, and then I went to Publix, which, it's a good store. There's a lot of things that are good about it, and there's a lot of things that are bad. I went straight to the meat section. I bought some hamburger meat, grass-fed. I know it probably isn't even grass-fed, but it's as close to it as I can find.
Got it.
So it's not a black and white issue here. There's so much gray. And so I buy that beef, bought a steak, bought hamburgers. I went to the beachfront. I cooked a steak and hamburgers. I ate the hamburgers last night. Took me less than 30 minutes. Same amount of time as people sit in the freaking drive-thru at McDonald's. Yep. And here I ate burgers last night, and I had a steak for breakfast. I won't have to eat again. Probably until late tonight if I don't want to. By eliminating all of I think that I have all these options. I don't give myself options.
Yeah. And so when you go and you're looking at kind of the meat counter, if you will, right? And they say, hey, what do you want? Right. Are there things that you will avoid in there in terms of selecting the meat at the grocery store, and things that you will go? So you mentioned grass-fed, like almost give people like, what's the framework, right? If they're going to go and they're going to get meat at the grocery store, what should they be thinking about, and what are the things that they should avoid? This episode is brought to you by 8 Sleep. Good sleep is a game changer, and the 8 Sleep pod is the best sleep machine. I sleep on it every single night. A great night of sleep allows you to be healthier, be more rested, and have more energy throughout the day. And on the brand new 8 Sleep Pod 3, you can sleep as cold as 55 degrees Fahrenheit or as hot as 110 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the secret of thermoregulation. Better sleep, better energy. Get yourself an 8 Sleep. You can go to 8sleep.com/pomp today to go ahead and get $150 off your order. 8sleep.com/pomp. Not only do I sleep on it every night, it literally changed my life, and I begged the founders to let me invest in the company. 8sleep.com/pomp. Go get yourself an 8 Sleep pod and get a better night of sleep.
One thing, you could go to and they'd have a butcher, right? Well, those don't, that doesn't exist. And so a lot of grocery stores won't even know where the beef comes from. They can't tell you because they have that, that wholesale market that I talked about earlier. So you don't really know. The butchers don't know. And so I don't eat supermarket beef, but I know a lot of people have to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay a little extra for it, because that's one thing that you should. If you're going to use that retail market through a supermarket, you should basically look for the grass-fed, look for the organic, because it's better than that crap beef that they're probably giving you. And that crap beef, like I said, it could be from Africa, it could be from Brazil, it can be from Texas, but you're not going to know. And the people that are basically selling you, they're not going to know either. And so if you can eliminate some of those deceptions, then just drill down as close as you can, and you're going to be okay. as you're doing that, you have to be very intentional about creating a new market access on how to get your pure animal protein. That's where you start. Pure animal protein and pure produce. And that's what the Beef Initiative is accomplishing.
All right, before we get to eliminating the grocery store from kind of the supply chain, when you go and you buy, if you have to, you're traveling or something, right? When you cook it on a grill, do you put anything on it? Like, what is the treatment from you purchased it till it goes in your mouth, right? What are you doing to the actual?
Well, I forgot to bring up that I do make my own butter, but whenever I'm at the grocery store, I'll get the best grass-fed butter that I can find. So you look at butter, and you're like, really? Well, I don't cook with oil. I cook with tallow, and I use butter. So I'll cook whenever I'm traveling across the United States in my pickup truck, which we'll go to that a little bit later, I carry a cast iron skillet with me, and I'll use it wherever I can, and I just put salt and pepper and freaking butter on a steak, and I cook it and I eat it, and it's better than any freaking steakhouse that you can find. Yeah. And if you're the consumer, man, you just flames, whatever you have.
Of course. And for your diet specifically, are you one of these folks who just eats meat, like the true kind of hardcore carnivore diet?
I'm not 100% carnivore, no.
Okay. Are you eating ice cream and Snickers bars as well?
Sometimes I'll freaking grab a snack. Hell yeah.
All right. I mean, so what does your diet look like in kind of on an average day? Are you eating other vegetables and fruits, or like what does that look like?
I used to quite often. If I eat anything in abundance beyond, pure, I'll eat bacon and eggs all the time. I was on the plane yesterday and I made a homemade breakfast taco. I brought that thing out and everybody started sniffing and looking around on the airplane. I was cracking up. So, those are those moments that are fun. But, I eat a lot of fruit. I'll definitely eat some fruit. I love, avocados and stuff like that. I just keep it simple. And once you start really making your diet more simple like that, you understand that you don't need all these other different types of varieties of nutritional delivery to your system. If you break down beef, and especially grass-fed, grass-finished, or even organic grain-finished beef, because we do both in the Beef Initiative, you're going to find out there's nothing that matches up as far as the vitamins, the minerals, and the true nutritional delivery to your system. There's nothing else in the world that we can have access to now on a larger scale that is better for you than pure animal protein. So what you do is, once you understand that, you really do eliminate a lot of the options that are nefarious at certain times, or they're just not needed. You're just making profit for somebody because you're the recycling bin.
Yeah. The recycling bin is such a good way to describe it because no one wants to be the recycling bin, right? I would actually argue that you should use trash bin because that elicits even more of an emotional response.
People get kind of butthurt.
Yeah,
so
of course.
I have to ease into it.
So you mentioned earlier about going closer to the source, right? And we mentioned in the beginning that you've got the rancher, who's then got the processor, who's got the supplier, who's got the grocery store. You actually try to cut out quite a bit of that supply chain. So describe a little bit, when you're at home, what do you do to get kind of the healthiest beef that you feel the most confident in terms of, I know where this is coming from?
Sure. What I did in the very beginning, I got into food intelligence. I told you, I've been doing this for about 3 years. And so after, I got off, I embedded myself in a harvest company last year. So I needed to go across the Midwest. I started in Texas, all the way to the border of Canada, all the way back to Texas, and going and researching grain companies, doing the harvest and seeing where we were, right? When I got back to Texas, I said, I know what I need to do. Here we go. So I went up and I shook a rancher's hand. And in my local community, in which I kind of stay, where I grew up, one of my home bases now, went up and shook his hand. And basically I said, tell me why you do what you do. Teach me. I want to know what you're doing. And he was the same place. He came from the same soil. And so we developed a relationship. By saying that, that's whenever the Beef Initiative kicked off. So, and whenever I'm in that part, it is Canyon, Texas. It's in the Texas Panhandle. Well, his name is Justin Trammell. He owns Panhandle Meats. And what Panhandle Meats is he's his own producer. He's an animal producer of fowl, hog, and beef. Okay. So now within this year, 2022, he opened up his own microprocessing center. So he is feeding the community. So anytime I need anything, I say, hey, Justin, I need a side of beef. I need a half a cow. I need a quarter of a cow. Okay. Well, I need some hog. I need some bacon. I need some sausage. You got any chickens? So the first touch point that I do as far as basically acquiring my food is I talk to that rancher, and then everything else spawns off from there.
I've heard you say shake a rancher's hand a couple of times over the last couple of months. What exactly does that mean in terms of the importance of it? And what are you trying to get out of that interaction?
Well, that was the story of Justin Trammell. Let me go segue into Cole Bolton of K&C Cattle down there south of Austin. Okay, he's the number one supplier of our beef right now. What I did is I did a lot of phone calls, not a lot, probably 2 or 3. And, everybody's pretty much suspect of me in the beginning because there's so much corruption and manipulation. These ranchers want to be left alone. They want to steward the land and they want to steward the animals. Well, once I went up there and Cole invited me out to his ranch, and what I did, because he's from Texas, he's a Texas cowboy, I'm a Texas cowboy. He's generational, I'm generational. And there's something there to be said about having that respect and that level of understanding of how you approach another person. And how we were raised is you better go up and look somebody in the eye and you better shake their damn hand. And you better establish a communication system that you two understand. And if you can do that now as an individual in this nation and in this world right now, it's a power move back into a new form of communication that we've lost. So the validity and the importance and the value of because I always talk, whenever I was in big tech, I got cited to do a study, and it was the study of the division of interpersonal communication and what technology was going to do to that interpersonal communication. And I did a lot of research on certain universities and what were they predicting with texting, emailing, and now look where we are. So the division of interpersonal communication is a pandemic and an epidemic within itself, within the United States and the world, because it's leveraged against us now. Our digital world is not. Sometimes it has a lot of deception in it, right?
100%.
Right. And so if we can have that understanding that basically relationship building is the most important thing that you can do in your life right now, it starts with that handshake. And with Cole Bolton, it started with the handshake, and it taught you 2 guys from Texas that have respect for each other and where we come from, where our ancestors come from. And if people will look at that and look at the true value of that, where's the store of value of that? Well, it's a lifelong relationship now that we're using to leverage to feed people, basically give them market access to a new lifestyle and a new consumption model that is based on health.
And when you mentioned market access, obviously the grocery store controls the market access because whatever they go and they are able to get from their suppliers, they're putting in the store, and that's the only access you have is to whatever they're selling if you're kind of the average person. By going directly to the rancher themselves and kind of cutting out the grocery store, maybe even the suppliers or whoever, you're drastically increasing your market access to what you want because you're able to talk directly to them.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about what you and Cole are doing in terms of trying to bring one, education, but also 2, healthier beef to millions of people.
Sure. And to kind of give credit to where credit is due right here, we have Justin. I have a lot of ranchers now that come through the Beef Initiative, but there was 3 major ranchers that stepped up and saw that what I was trying to do and wanted to get on board. One of those was Jason Rick of Rick Ranches, and we just had a conference out in Colorado at his ranch. What he talked about, and it was the same day, I talked to all 3 of those guys, and every one of them said a vertical integration. Well, what do you mean by that? And you heard me earlier say vertical integration back into human health. It's the vertical integration back into a decentralized food system. What does that mean? Well, it starts with the soil. That's the source. You start with the soil, then the grass, then the cow, then the producer rancher, animal producer, then the processor. Okay, well, Cole and I and Jason and Justin, every one of us have a decentralized market access through that processing center. Once that animal is produced, processed, and ready to be delivered to you and me, well, we don't have to have permission. Now we are the ones that are saying, we get to sell that beef to you, and we get to sell it to you and you and you.
It's like a direct-to-consumer product in
100%.
the technology world. You're basically going direct-to-consumer with healthy beef.
Yeah, and a lot of people have tried it, and they haven't had much luck with it.
Why not?
Well, I think it's too centralized. And, we're in Bitcoin, the reason one of the most strongest and I think overlooked aspects of Bitcoin is the decentralized mindset. Okay, I come from networking, computer networking. That's how I got started in technology. Decentralization right now is the most important power move that you can have. And so whenever you can actually get the best nutrition that is out there in the world right now in a decentralized way, that is actually the lifestyle. That is the power move that you're looking for. And so whenever you create a vertical integration that is decentralized, where you don't have to ask for permission anymore, then basically you're going to have success. If you have a centralized type of system that's not a vertical integration, it's a linear integration, then you're going to have too many people making decisions, and you're going to have to ask permission from each one of those. Is that permission from, as far as, farm to table, like we said, is that going to be controlled by a chemical company? Is it going to be controlled by a processing company? Is it going to be controlled by a distribution company? Is it going to be controlled by a supermarket? Is it going to be controlled by a health department? Is it going to be controlled? Every one of those you have to battle through and say, well, that's not very easy. So that's why it hasn't been successful, because they haven't been able to decentralize the market access, that vertical integration.
What goes into building one of these microprocessors?
I've been working for 2 years now and looking deep into it. In the state of Texas, we have over 200 processing centers, as I said, micro processing centers, not the big giant processing centers, the smaller ones. And what they're not complex. Really what they are is a lot of it's freezer space. You have a harvest chute, then you have a processing chute, then you basically package the animal, and then of course you freeze. One thing that I didn't say right there is aging the beef. So you have sections, okay, in a processing center.
And just to be super granular, and I apologize to anyone who doesn't want the kind of the ground truth, if you will.
Right.
Animal shows up, it's alive.
Right.
The animal is held there for some period of time, could be a short period or a long period. The animal is slaughtered. The animal is then cut up. The animal is then potentially aged.
It's aged first before it's cut up.
Okay, so if the animal is slaughtered and going to be aged, it will then just sit there. It then is cut up and then packaged and frozen,
right,
and then waits to be delivered to whether it is the supplier or, in this case, direct to the consumer.
80% right now it's wholesale, so we don't have any control over that. But yeah, you sum it up. You basically within our model of decentralized market access and the vertical integration. Let's talk about feedlot. Feedlot factory farming is what it's called. Well, those thousands of cattle are stacked usually on top of each other. Well, see, that's the process.
And again, this is me being super dumb.
No, we need to be.
Alive or dead?
Alive.
Alive. Okay, so they're stacked on top of each other when they're alive.
Yeah, they call fat cows.
Okay.
And so you take them to a fat cow, weight, because that's where the money is. A fat cow.
The more meat they
money.
have, the more money you're going to make.
But see, the producer and the rancher is not making that money. It's the processing centers. And so right there, but if you go through something like ours, you say, well, the cow shows up and then hangs out there a long time, or no, in a regenerative, decentralized way, and what's what we're doing within the beef initiative in each one of these ranchers and many more, and that people don't realize is that cow has the best life that you could hope for. It is stewarded from a calf all the way to that day that is going to basically be harvested. Well, it shows up. It might be there a day or two, but it doesn't know anything because they change pastures all the time because they're doing rotational grazing. So that cow shows up to be harvested. It's not a big thing. It's not stress, because you don't want to stress out a cow because you get these cows that are supermarket beef. A lot of times they're extremely stressed, and whenever you have that adrenaline rush at the time that they're harvested, it taints the beef, and that's another thing.
This blows my mind, right? Which is we know in humans, If we had a child psychological development, like a psychologist on recently, and she talked about, look, if the mother is super stressed out during pregnancy, there are physiological changes that occur in the child. If a child's mother during pregnancy is addicted to meth, there's physiological changes to the child. And so when we know that in humans, this idea, I think sometimes gets almost like mocked of like, what do you mean if the cow is stressed out? Why would it not change the physiological structure of the cow if it is stressed, if it has high adrenaline, if it has whatever, and then you were going to take that animal and put it in your body? And so I don't see any labels of like chill cow, stressed cow at the grocery store, right? And so when you talk about this, is this an intentional thing, or is it just something that we've noticed where in certain processing centers, the cows are super stressed out and in other ones they're not?
Yeah, I think it's been a cause and effect type thing, right? You know, as we grew in size and capacity to be able to, you know, to raise millions and millions and millions of cattle on the commodity side of things, as far as commodity grains, well, you got to have a match system. It's like, okay, we're bringing, you know, there's processing centers that will harvest 3,000 cattle in a day. Okay, you look at that type of capacity, well, they're just on an assembly line. And that's what everybody hates. That's what the vegans hate. That's what the vegetarians hate. It's, you know, the globalists pointed out. It's like, oh, this is horrible. And it is. It's destructive. It's not all like that. There's a lot of different, you know, once again, we can't generalize. But to basically, if you have the awareness that that type of stuff is true and valid, it's something that is known to happen as far as on the bad side of that stressing and affecting the psychological well-being of that animal does matter 100%, just like it does in humans. And so if you look at that and you take ownership that that is true and factual, then you can look at the type of animal producers that's what they live for. They want that animal to have the best life that it can, and then they want to honor that animal to turn it into a new form of energy. Okay, the commodity cowboy route, it's not that the commodity cowboys are making that a bad, stressful thing for the cow. It's not them. It's the processors. It's the global guys that are basically, if that meat is tainted with adrenaline, it's psychological damage at time of harvesting, it's not the producers. It's the global processors.
And so when we think about kind of these microprocessors, how much money did it cost to build one of these things?
Well, I'm glad you bring that up, because I've been holding it back as far as what's another. I always work in solutions. And so we're announcing probably within 2 weeks that we're going to have the Beef Initiative Association Council. What that is we've looked at the microprocessors in the state of Texas, and we want to have and this is ambitious, but we want to have a microprocessor in every county in the state of Texas, just like my grandfather did, and just like Justin's grandfather did, just like Cole's grandfather did. Justin's opened up his. He does about 30 cattle a week. He feeds the community.
How many people could 30 cattle feed, in a week?
It's not that much. That goes to show you that there's not competition here. But he feeds everybody. He is making a dang good living now. He has a pillar of strength on a monetary system that he never had. So he is full at capacity at all times. He is producing and feeding everybody that he wants. Okay, well, there's going to be another Justin pop up. Well, let's look at Cole. He's now opening up his processing center south of Austin. He's going to be about 250 cattle a week. So his reach is a little bit more, and he's going to go a little bit more regional from his community. That's his number one goal. But now within the Beef Initiative, we're actually right now, because we're stepping up, our volume is increasing tenfold. We can ship beef right now across 48 states. And we've been doing that now since January. We just haven't advertised it because we wanted to make sure we had a base layer foundational level. So going back to the question, Justin, back in the day, whenever he did it, under $1 million. Cole's going to be, the size of how much you're going to process. These days and times, it's It's hard to say because of inflation, but it's not that hard to accomplish on the big scale of things. A microprocessing center, the amount of cost and the amount of return that you get as far as community building, pillar of strength and monetary, it's a damn good move. And so what we're going to do, we have USDA precedents now within the beef initiative is in processing centers. You can come to us. We will advise you from the ground up all the way to your last inspection within the state in which we're going to do Texas first, to where you're pretty sure you have a rubber stamp that you can make this happen. We look at your capital expenditures. We look what you have as far as investments. We look at your geography, what you're going to do. We look at the type of market access that you're going to create in your community. We get all that built in, and then that way, whenever we consult you, that you're going to know that you're pretty much in the right direction, and that you can actually, start really changing the game here, because it does start with the processing centers.
So if we go to the 4 large ones, I started Googling around, and frankly, my mind was blown.
Yeah.
The reason I started to Google was because in one of your pieces, you wrote 2 things that caught my attention. The first was most of them are owned by families that have owned them for long periods of time. And the second was you made a comment that I think it was Cargill has so much technology and intelligence that it rivals the CIA. Let's start with the families first, which is good or bad that the same families have controlled these and been able to consolidate so much of it. And if it's bad, is it that the families are bad, or is it that it's just been consolidated?
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll look at Cargill, and it's not the smartest thing to do to talk crap on Cargill. So I just kind of point out what it is. It's definitely families that have been close to the money since the very beginning of us really, being around money. They go way back. They have history. And what they do now is they have the capacity to be able to control basically shipping lanes. They have, they have their barges, they have everything from the very beginning of that seed to the very end of that seed, they control. And they control it on a global front. Well, to have that much control over the seed itself is basically, it takes an intelligence apparatus. They do have basically 7,000 people that work for them, and they mirror the CIA as far as intelligence. They do have satellites. They do basically look at things. They innovate with technology in a way that big money can, being that close to money that they can do. It's very centralized. It's very hush-hush. And, a lot of it's very good. A lot of it's, they basically, but for that one family to control the access to the seeds of humanity, that's a little ridiculous. And if you put it in perspective, there's no way in hell that should happen. But they always come up with reasons why they are the stewards of the seed of the world. No, it shouldn't be that way. You look at all the seeds like we had in America, a lot of our heirloom seeds now are under lock and key, and we don't have access to those seeds anymore. What we have access is to genetically modified seeds, which are controlled by these families.
What is fascinating to me is that he who owns the seed, right, or the supply of the seed has so much power, seems like, well, that's kind of crazy. This has been going on for centuries.
Yeah.
If you go back to ancient Rome, I think it's Commodus was the emperor of Rome at the time, Marcus Aurelius' son. And if I remember the story correctly, one of his advisors or kind of his close friends, he essentially said, hey, you're going to be in charge for a while, and I'm just going to go and, screw off essentially.
Right.
And let me know if anything goes wrong. And one of the things that advisor did was he actually manipulated the supply of grain to the city of Rome, and his goal or his plan was to essentially create near famine and then to step in and essentially re-release the grain supply back to the people and be the hero.
Of course.
Now, for those that know nothing about ancient Rome, a lot of the grain came from Egypt and would come over. And so he was essentially diverting, once it got to what is now known as Italy, into his own personal warehouses and kind of all this stuff, right? that was crazy to look back and say, what do you mean one guy could basically divert the entire grain supply of a city, bring them to near famine? And obviously what happened is he screwed it up because he was an idiot. And literally people were starving in the streets, and there was uprising and social unrest and all these different things. And finally the emperor woke up and was like, hey, maybe I should step in here and do my job. That is AD, right? Right.
Exactly.
Here we are in 2022 talking about the same damn thing of like who controls the supply of grain, which is crazy to me.
It is. And you look at, I mean, I'm glad you point that out. I mean, I did a piece, I called it Let the Poor Court the Rich. And I took sections of, City of God out of it. And I quoted, and a lot of people didn't know that I was quoting from the City of God because it reads as of today. And you go, whoa, what? That was 2,000 years ago? You look at the City of God and what it was, it was a control of food consumption back then. As far as people know about Rome, a lot of their agricultural was because of their soldiers, their warriors, and they would go off. And so throughout time, their food supply basically got diminished and their nutritional value as a society depleted. And that was always, like you just pointed out, by their rulers. And so you look at who are our rulers now? Well, it's basically the people that control the access, the source of the seed itself is the ones that we actually are answering to. And we're answering to them in ways that we have no clue about. And they're able to, really control the narrative, the delivery of content, the consumption model of your audio, your video, and the food itself. And that's what we have to go and, we can't be surface level understanding of what food is anymore. And understanding history, just as you pointed out very well, and understanding how we can circumvent around that type of control. It's like we don't have to really dissect it forever. What we have to do is just be aware of it and say, I'm not going to play that game anymore. I don't have to. And that's, what we're doing within the beef initiative. We're just circumventing around it.
So your approach is to essentially say, I cannot change the GMO kind of ESG argument. And so let's route around it.
Sure.
There are other countries, specifically in Europe, it seems like it's probably where this has taken kind of hold the most, where as a country, whether it's from the leadership or it is from the population, they have just rejected this GMO kind of entire movement to some degree, all the way to the point where I know France has a GMO cultivation ban.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what is going on in Europe with kind of these genetically modified kind of bans to some degree.
Well, we'll start with the American public. Okay. We've always been the guinea pig for this big global, industrial food industry, right? And so when GMOs first came out, Europe totally, collectively, they said, screw you guys, man, we're not consuming this crap. And, I've been around the world, you've been around the world, we've seen different places and the type of foods that you can eat, especially packaged and processed food. Well, Europe's always been very good about pushing back. France has always kind of led that as well. The Netherlands, they do as much as they can. A lot of people don't realize that the Netherlands creates second largest amount of produce in the world. So they do, export a lot of food out of there. Well, they've stayed closer to the seed of nutrition than we have. And they've done these pushbacks against the genetically modified food. You get it in Europe as a whole, they've done that. And they've been very successful up to now. And now people that I talk to, friends I have in the UK, friends I have in Spain, friends I have in Portugal, friends I have in Ireland, friends I have in France, friends I have in, the Netherlands, they're all saying the same thing now. The pushback is not there anymore. And they're flooding with highly processed food. And Europe is seeing something basically that they haven't seen. They're coming on our coattails as far as this metabolic bankruptcy that we're going through. And so the pushback has always been there by Europe, and they've done a very good job. But what we need for us in America and for the Europeans to do, especially the French, because they've led that, let's get back to where we were in this. Let's understand what they're planning for us with the land grabs that they're doing in the Netherlands, and the different types of distributions that they're going to establish with this new fake commodity system that they're introducing.
Is it possible to roll back kind of how much progress the chemical companies have made?
100%.
Okay. Well, how do we do that?
Well, one thing, and this is where we have to become strong individuals, strong-minded and strong with our desires. I always ask people, why do you desire what you desire? Get in front of that accountability mirror and take a look. We all have to do it in certain aspects of our life. You should be doing it. We need to do it with our consumption. Okay, our consumption is basically called a consumer demand. Let's change our consumer demand as an individual. And once we do that, we are in control. We just don't give ourselves credit for that. If we create a whole new lifestyle, call the Beef Initiative, it's an international lifestyle that people just don't understand yet. And people are starting to understand what I'm talking about. Is like, hey, I have the right. I don't have to ask for permission to eat what I want to eat, but I'm not going to eat something that I'm not educated about. So I'm going to go out there and establish relationships with communities. Wherever you stand is what you have to look at. Somebody in Washington State is going to be somebody different in Philadelphia. And what we have to do is get each individual to start realizing, change the consumer demand and quit looking at food as entertainment. It actually needs to be very intentional. My grandfather grew his land, consumed his food, and consumed those animals and that produce on a survival mindset. Okay, that gave a lot of strength because they knew first and foremost, if I'm not really intentional about how this seed goes from the ground and into my body, then I'm going to deplete my power as an individual. And if people can kind of look at that, it doesn't have to be extreme, but if you can point your consumer demand in a different place, they start paying attention.
How important is education in terms of, obviously, there's a lot that you said today.
Yeah.
I wasn't taught that in school.
Right.
Unfortunately, most parents, they don't know this information. They weren't taught it in school. Where do you see the sources of education today, and how important would it be if we could even get some of this education into schools or other forms for young people to consume? Well,
and that's a fantastic question. In Canyon, Texas, I live right close to an agricultural university. That's where I grew up. I mean, there's a museum there that I'm going to have a regional food summit based on education. So you look at these institutions, and a lot of them still, they steward a lot of great, information. Some intelligence, though, and some information and education is backed by these chemical companies and these grain companies. Understanding that, say, okay, well, I want to go learn you, of course, at the university level. But the one thing that I found out with every rancher that I deal with, they don't sell their product. What they do is they educate. And so you go up there and you create that relationship with that rancher. You want to talk about education that starts from the seed up. You're going to find out everything you want to know. And as the Beef Initiative does grow, we're introducing new channels that you can go out there and get educated. Like I let people write for my Substack, and they basically, I say, what are you trying to accomplish? What is your why here? And a lot of them are young guys right now that they're bringing a lot of freaking food intelligence that I don't have time to provide. So I think collectively, especially within the Bitcoin space and within the ranching space, there's a lot of education moving forward. What I did within the Beef Initiative, and I'm just now really kind of launching it out there, is we have a scholarship program. Okay. In Colorado, what we did is Jason Rick of Rick Ranches, he's the one that I referred to earlier. He basically gets a scholarship in his name now. It's backed by one full Bitcoin, and what he gets to do, and us collectively as a Beef Initiative, we get to start bringing in people that want to be educated in a different way. We want observational science of biology and how land and how the animal is stewarded. In that way, that's a new form of education that we're going to start introducing. And if we can kind of organize that in a way that is open sourced, that is crowd-funded and crowdsourced, then the education model kind of changes. That awareness changes.
When we think about educating the individual, that's the consumer.
Right.
If we move upstream, I guess, a little bit to
Sure.
the grocery stores themselves. Is there any hope in local grocery stores maybe are more receptive than the national grocery stores in terms of, hey, you all are responsible for the food that you are selling to the consumer. If we can change the consumer demand, what if we can change the grocery store demand?
Right. Yeah.
Is there anything going on there?
There is. And actually, if you look at I talked to Cole yesterday and I said, hey, what should I bring up that's current affairs, state of affairs right now? Because that's what the Beef Initiative is. We're the voice of the rancher that's on the ground. And he said there is some legislation that's moving forward to where it will help us regional processors, the smaller processors, have better direct access and market access to these supermarkets, and to where we can create a wholesale type of, access to the retail side of things.
So the rancher can basically say, hey, I'm going to set up a microprocessor, and then rather than take my the product from the microprocessor, have to sell it to the supplier, who then goes sells it to the grocery store.
Yeah.
Similar to Tesla that says, hey, we're going to sell cars, but we're not going to put them in car dealerships. We're going to sell them in our own car dealerships directly to the consumer. Now all of a sudden, the rancher with a microprocessor can go right to the grocery store, which sounds like that's a win for the end consumer.
It really does.
But it also sounds like maybe there's a little bit of pain there for the suppliers who may not like that.
Well, it's capitalism, right? And what is capitalism truly driven by? Consumer demand. And so looking at that, let's reflect on our summit in Georgia that's coming up in September. That's Will Harris of White Oak Pastures. What he did, he was the first regenerative farmer and rancher to sell grass-fed beef to Whole Foods.
Okay.
He created his basically retail wholesale system based on that. So Whole Foods brought him in before Bezos, of course, bought him out and everything. But he created consumer demand for his product by doing exactly what we're talking about. I think that we have the power now, and we have maybe some legislation that's going to allow us to do that in a way that we haven't had in the past.
Explain more what he did. So he went to Whole Foods and said, hey, I'm not a supplier, but I want to sell my product in your stores. Here's a bunch of people who want it, or how did that work?
Yeah, pretty much. What he did, he brought a lot of studies to Whole Foods. Whole Foods, I mean, they're supposed to be the standard,
that's a good person to go put some pressure on.
Right. And so what he did is like, hey, this is how we can be a true, nature lover. If you're going to love the earth, then let's look what I do with the earth, what I do with the soil. Well, I use these land tools, and they're called cows. And what I do is I basically save my ranch by using these land tools, this livestock. When you want to be part of that, here's the studies. Here's how we can regrow soil without using chemicals, without using fertilizers, without using pesticides. And so he made a case for being the best beef that Whole Foods should bring on. And so by him doing that, he did it not in an exploitive way, but a good way that got attention. And so therefore, all of a sudden, Whole Foods is, hell yeah, people love this grass-fed beef. Let's turn it into a retail, option for our consumers. And then collectively, his current consumers helped drive that consumer demand, and Whole Foods understood that that was the best business move that they could. And right now, you have everybody across the nation, they buy White Oak Pasture beef from Whole Foods because that's the market access, or they buy it from White Oak Pastures itself. So Will Harris has a wholesale, and he has retail, and he did it all on his own. And that's one of the reasons we're having that summit there, just beyond him being Will Harris. But people get to see that it is possible, that we have a case study, we have proof of work. And that's what Beef Initiative is doing right now collectively with Jason, Rick, Justin, Cole, all the other producers that are coming in. We are creating that same type of model and mindset.
I feel like ranchers, when they meet other ranchers, there's kind of a mutual respect, as you've referenced a few times. It's just a game where if enough ranchers get together, the processors, the suppliers, they are actually serving at the whims of the rancher. An individual rancher is too weak by themselves and doesn't have enough leverage. But I don't know, 20%, 50% of
You
ranchers in the country get together and say enough's enough.
Well,
and the power shifts.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt because I get excited when I get to ask this, and the cowboy in me kind of comes out. You damn right we can, and what we can do is we can have these damn commodity cowboys, and I say this with respect, is to grow some balls, and let's get out there and let's quit freaking funneling our nutrition to the processors. Let's say you're going to listen to us and we're going to change things because we're being shorted out here. A lot of guys, they're leveraged hard and they can't do that. But as we grow with awareness and education like we're doing today on the show, what we're doing is we're giving confidence to the ranchers to say we do have more control than we thought we did. We do see proof of work now. We do want to change our protocol where we can eliminate some of these captured prospects or processes in which we have to operate into. It's a slow game. It's low time. It took us a long time to get here. It's not just all of a sudden, 50 years to create an issue. Well, it's not 50 years to solve it. I say the beef initiative right now in this phase is a 10-year program. But within this decade, what we can do is we can actually bring the rancher back home and we can bring basically our local cattle back home.
So when you see this problem, I think we can outline kind of theoretically, here's the solutions. One of the things we haven't talked about is there's immense friction in this process. Obviously, it would be pressured from the processors, from the suppliers, maybe even the grocery stores. There's an element of having to convince the American consumer to change their demand patterns. Not impossible, but still education and all of that. But there's examples outside of the cattle industry that we can point to. Somebody like an Amos Miller, who's recently been in the news, that there's other pressures from regulatory bodies, from the government. Describe a little bit for folks the Amos Miller kind of story and kind of your understanding of what that is, because I think while differences, there are some similarities between the individual saying, hey, I want to do something different. And, he's been doing that, it seems like, for quite a while.
Well, he sets the standard on, on being able to stand up, and he stands up to the federal, government is what he does, and he's a rancher and he has access to a lot of different lands. And so, he's out, I believe is Nevada, correct? And so what he's done is he's taken a stance and he's willing to pioneer into the understanding and the awareness of what type of overreach and what type of regulatory capture has happened in America. And a lot of his story has been basically, there's a lot of prohibition against that type of information. And so whenever you as a rancher and a producer in the United States of America, that's why you don't really know. That's why the general public doesn't understand what's really going on, because it's risky business. And, with Amos Miller and what he's gone through on the federal level, it's a movie within itself. It's a book within itself. And there's a lot of aspects of the story, and you brought it up yesterday. Bring up one little touch point to what you read and what made you curious about Amos Miller.
Yeah. Well, there was two main points. I think the first one was recently in the news. I saw a headline, and it's positioned as like independent farmer or however they described it, is now being fined by the federal government. And okay, I'm sure that there's fines, every single day they get levied, and most of them are because somebody broke rules. Now we can argue over the validity of the rules or not, but somebody either intentionally or unintentionally broke rules, and there's fines. All right, that happens every single day in the United States of America. But then I read the second line, which was he was selling to his local community. He's got kind of a subscription service going and all this. And by no means am I an expert, but what caught my attention was that he essentially was trying to sell raw milk and other things that obviously a portion of the population believes is healthier. And they want access. Going back to kind of there's market demand for these things. And so capitalistic society, somebody will step in and serve that demand. And he's happens to do that. And I moved on. And I thought to myself, okay, there's a fine, it'll get figured out. And frankly, I'm not a food connoisseur nor a food expert. And so I'll move on with my day. And yesterday I saw somebody who had recently been on the show, Dave Collum. He tweeted an article, and it was about a federal raid on a farm. This is going back almost a decade. And so I started to say, wait a second, like, this is not a one-time thing that's been going on recently. This is a multi-year battle, essentially.
Yes.
And there's arguments on both sides that some people agree with one side, some people agree with others, but majority of people just say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. They say, well, yeah, it sounds good to have, the FDA look at the food and make sure that I don't eat it and die. On the other side, you have people saying, but if I can actually make it healthier and sell it directly to people who want it, and you have two consenting adults entering into a contract, then we should be able to do that as well. And so it's a fascinating issue because the deeper you go, the more complexity there is. And frankly, you can see where education ultimately ends up being the single most important thing throughout that entire situation.
It's the best leverage you can have. And that's what we're doing here. And what, with Miller, it is, you look at the dairy industry and, everybody thinks, ooh, pasteurized skim milk that's the most unhealthy thing, in my opinion, that you could be consuming. It takes all the animal fat. It takes all the vitamins and minerals out of your milk. They boil milk and say, oh, it's safe. You're not going to die from drinking raw milk. So you look at Miller, and this is something that people are starting to be educated basically on, and they do. They want market access, and they want to include it into their consumption model is raw milk. Well, it's how we got here. That's how my mother was raised. It's how I used to wake up as a child on the front porch. There was milk, and it was every other day you had milk delivered to you.
It wasn't boiled?
It wasn't boiled. It was straight from the cow. Guess what, man? This big little... all of this that you just said is regulatory capture and ignorance. I'm not saying it's bad ignorance. It's just ignorance that we have been kept away from of understanding what true nutrition is, what pure nutrition is, and what pure animal protein and pure animal fat. It's how we got here, people. And they say, well, we're so populated now that, we can't do that. It's just impossible. No, it's not. That's their narrative. That's their argument. And so what he's doing, he's fighting the system. And he's saying, I have a group of people that want my product. I am actually providing more benefit to the soil, to the earth, and to my community than any global corporation that has captured the dairy market. And so you poke the bear, guess what happens? You have to go up and you have to fight. You get fined. Let's talk about fines. Okay, let's talk about how fines work. Well, let's go back to JBS. Okay, they're the biggest meat processor in the United States. They're out of Brazil. They actually, they have been fined hundreds of millions of dollars. Just this last year, they were settled out of court, federal court, $56 million. They had to pay $56 million. Well, why? What it was is during COVID that they made basically over $500 million on price manipulation of beef in the United States.
Got it.
Okay, the general consumer doesn't know that.
So, by the way, $500 million of revenue, or $500 million of profit and a $56 million fine.
Yes,
that sounds like a pretty good margin to just keep incentivized
let's get
to do
the
that.
Consulting company to do it again for us. Let's make sure that we have that lined up on our next move. Here. Chess. Let's play some chess with the federal government, and they do it very well. And the owner of and the founder of JBS served 2 years in prison in Brazil for bribing the Brazilian president, along with politicians. And they had a fast track of bribing politicians in the United States. Guess what? Settle out of court. JBS has been fined hundreds of millions of dollars, and the general public doesn't know about it. The Department of Justice should be all over JBS. Well, why isn't it? Well, we live in the United States. We have regulatory capture. We have lobbyists. We have big money. We have global plans, and it's part of a global industrial food shift. And if you don't understand the source of the seed of the corruption, how can you understand the source of the seed of the solution? So if you're going to have this globalist movement that is okay and can afford these fines, okay, well, what are we going to do? We're going to get this guy named Amos Miller, and we're going to make an example of him, and we're going to put him all over the media, and we're going to let everybody know that, oh my gosh, what he's doing is bad for your health. It's bad for for your children's health. We can prove it. Pasteurization and basically this new type of food that we're introducing into the food system is what you really need to be paying attention to. Don't pay attention to all the corruption that happens over here on the side and who is basically. Let's look at the politicians. Let's look at the federal government that's going after Miller. Who are they? Who are funding them? That's the type of food intelligence you need to start introducing into your life. Because up to now, it's been random. We can't be random with it.
And when we think about these new things that are introduced into the food supply, obviously pasteurized milk and things like that, I think people put into a bucket and they say it's milk.
Yeah.
Right. And they don't know the difference between pasteurized versus raw milk or whatever. And milk is milk, and milk's always been a staple in the diet. And so they go to the store and they buy it and they consume it. Where I do think that people, there's debate, maybe is a politically correct way to say it,
right,
is when you get into the bioengineered meats. So this is impossible food and all of these. Beyond Meat, there's a couple other ones. They now have cracked from, hey, we'll sell you the patties in the grocery store to, Burger King or McDonald's or wherever. They've started to get into that market.
Yeah.
And you can go and you can buy these. And usually they'll tell you, hey, you're buying a patty that is not meat. It's the, Beyond Burger or whatever they want to call it.
Morningstar Farms. Yeah. They were one of the first ones.
Yeah. And so it's in some ways, if you're hip, if you're cool, if you care about the environment, right, you go and you buy this. If you're a vegan, right, you go and you buy this, whatever. But it's not hard to see a world where, like, rather than there being internet companies, now everyone's just a company and they happen to use the internet. Rather than having the, genetically modified burger, it just becomes the burger. And so what is your thoughts about this whole world of like fake meat that seems to be the, the sludge is taking over is kind of like the critics argument. Like what's going on? This episode is brought to you by Ledger, the best crypto hardware wallet. Everyone's heard the phrase, not your keys, not your coins. And that's more true today than it's ever been. Ultimately, a value proposition of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is self-custody, where you get to retain ownership over your digital assets. That is what Ledger specializes in. They've got multiple pieces of hardware, and they also have the Ledger Live mobile app, which makes it seamless to not only retain control over your Bitcoin, but also allows you to interface with exchanges, lending platforms, and other types of software products. If you're interested in upping your self-custody game, go check out Ledger today. Shop.ledger.com. Again, that's shop.ledger.com. Go check them out and start doing self-custody. You'll thank me later.
Well, I know it's a slow roll into change as far as them changing our food consumption, right? And, the last year, I think it was basically last fall, I talked about kind of the fake meat. And I said, there's going to be a global marketing plan that gets released in 2022, and it's going to be based around consumption of fake meat. Well, sure enough, we go through and all of a sudden everybody starts seeing fake meat commercials. They're seeing it at Burger King, they're seeing it in the schools, they're seeing everything. And people are out there, on social media, and they're saying, I'm never eating that damn 3D printed steak. I'm never eating that damn veggie burger that, looks like a hamburger patty. I'm not eating that sausage that looks all flaccid. And, you have all kinds of things that people are talking about of fake meat. That's the distraction. What I mean by that? Well, they pretty much know that you're not going to go over there, running through the aisles, can't wait to get to your fake meat patties or your fake meat steak. What they are, though, and they've already done it, and a lot of basically actions and maneuvers are already moving forward, is they're going to inject fake meat and, let's say, fake protein. Let's go there. I don't even want to use the word meat anymore. Fake protein into our food supply in ways that we don't know. You heard me talk about the FDA and the GRAS rule, the labeling changes in which we do. How many people go and look at their box and really can pronounce all those words, right? So it's a play on the English language. It's a play on understanding words. Well, now what they're doing is you're seeing bugs. Oh, shit. Now we're going to have to eat bugs. And they're teaching children how to eat crickets as they teach them how to brush their teeth.
I saw the video where there's a guy. He's dressed up. He must be important. He's got, dressed like he's going to, church on Sunday.
Yeah.
And he's sitting in front of the classroom. And there's, young kids, exactly what you would expect in kind of like an elementary classroom, it looks like. And he pulls out a bag that you would see at the airport, at the grocery store, at a convenience store, or whatever. And it could have anything from M&Ms to, whatever other processed stuff that they've put in there. And he's basically telling the kids that there's crickets in this bag. And, maybe they're chocolate covered crickets or maybe they're regular crickets or whatever they've come up with.
Yeah.
And he's handing them out to the kids. And of course I see the video because it only cracks into my world on Twitter if it's being mocked and ridiculed and like, this is insane. But it made me stop and say, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah. Well, it's social engineering at its finest, of course, because that's what we do these days is we engineer society in a way that they want us to be engineered socially. So you look at that and I've been, like I said, we've traveled. I used to go down to Oaxaca in Mexico, and chipolinas is something that you can go and you can get, at the market, you walk up and get a bag of chipolinas. They can be, spicy, or they can have, some type of, caramel on it. Go to Asia, same thing. People have been eating chipolinas, crickets and grasshoppers and locusts forever. It was something. It does have protein in it. But what they don't really, explain with that type of marketing and advertising is that they already have stuff called cricket dust, cricket flour. So what they've done, like with seed oils, they've taken a weed and basically made it one of the biggest consumption commodities in the world with that canola or any other type of seed oil, okay? Well, they're going to do the same thing with this fake protein, be it pea protein, soy protein, crickets, whatever they come along with, scorpions, whatever they want to do, they'll interject it and inject it into our food supply, and we won't even know it because most of people out there are okay with eating their pizza pockets and their chicken tendies, and they don't even know what the hell it is, and it's not chicken. Well, it's not pizza. It's not, it's not pepperoni, because you look at, I've worked with some people in the industrial food, basically factories, the processing systems themselves. Used to, you'd get a burrito, and it was a combination burrito. And we're just using this as an example. Half of it was beans, half of it was beef. Okay, great. Well, they can call it a beef and bean burrito, right? And that's legal, right? Well, now, shit, beef is kind of more expensive. Well, let's put 70% beans and let's put 30% beef. Well, no, let's do 30% beef. Let's do 20% of soy protein, and then we'll do 50% beans. So throughout the time, that combination burrito has basically started out exactly what it was said. The labeling laws have changed to where now that combination burrito can be 10% beans, it can be 80% soy, and now moving forward, it'll be 20% bugs. And it'll be that type of pea protein, bug protein, whatever they say is actually healthier and is better for the planet, they'll be putting it in those products. Well, the people that are eating those products are usually children, and it's usually mothers that are buying, and fathers that are buying that label. They're buying the wordage saying heart healthy, good for children, packed with protein. 14 grams of protein, and they're saying you don't need as much protein now. So they're manipulating society to think that you do not need animal protein, that vegetable protein is even better. And basically by doing that, they're able to inject that fake protein into the food supply.
It's absolutely insane that this is
and this is moving forward hard.
One of the other things as we talk about children blew my mind. The new New York City mayor, Mayor Adams. He's very excited to tell people that he doesn't eat meat. He's I think he said he's vegetarian or vegan or one
I can tell.
Well, he's made a lot of promises, and then I was excited because I thought that he understood Bitcoin, and then all of a sudden started talking about banning Bitcoin mining, and I said I don't think you understand at all. The part that absolutely just sent me over the edge was they're trying to remove meat from the children's diets in the schools. So it's not even just saying like, it's one thing if you say, hey, protein's important. Let's not eat steak. Instead, we're going to eat chicken, or we're going to eat, even crickets, right? Frankly, okay. But just this whole washing of like protein essentially from the diets and meatless Mondays and coming up with all these like crazy things.
Yeah.
It just falls back to like, just leave the kids the fuck alone.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so what do you take as to politicians stepping in and implementing these kind of wide sweeping changes to the diet inside of public schools?
It's going to be kind of a long answer, but I'll give it a reflection as a child in the middle of Texas. We used to, at one point in time, they did feed us soy burgers back in the 70s. Well, that soy was different then. Okay, it was probably a little bit healthier. It was probably good, to go ahead and use the school system and basically provide kids that weren't getting good protein. That was a supplement. Okay, so be it. It's a subsidized supplement that had validity, and that was in the 1970s. Okay, you look at it now and everything. Let's look at the health of a freaking nation right now where our kids are ages 5 to 11 now, 46% of them are obese or overweight.
It's crazy.
1 out of 2 is going to diabetes or already has diabetes. That's the health of our kids in this nation. That is a fucking genocide. And if people do not start understanding that, we're going to kill our kids in a way that we don't see, but we're going to let these stupid politicians do it. That's where we say no more.
And when we think about this, it feels like the kids...
They're helpless.
Yeah, they don't know any better, right?
No.
They go to school and whatever they're fed, it's a belief that the teacher or the cafeteria manager or the chef or whatever, they're just here to look out for me. Like I live in a safe world, right? And unfortunately, there's kids who go to school and that is the most dense and supposed to be most nutritious meal that they're going to get all day.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it just goes back to like, just leave the kids alone.
Exactly. And actually, that should be the first thing that all of us as adults, responsible people, parents, we're all parents or going to be parents, probably a high percentage. We can look at ourselves and say, okay, but what we have to do is we have to get right. It's like, I talked to a lot of doctors and I said, where do we start with the education with our parents? And Dr. Mary Kerr, she spoke at one of our conferences. She says that we have to treat it like we're on an airplane, okay, that the oxygen masks come down. We got to put the oxygen masks on ourselves first. And then once we understand what we're up against, what politicians like Jackass is doing in New York, then we can look at the solutions in which we can basically get around of. And so you look at the school programs. I'll give you an example. Coming from Texas, I love ranches, but you have a ranch out there and it's the 4 Sixes. It used to be one of the biggest ranches in the world.
Okay.
Well, what they did, they have a certain county out there, okay? And I believe it's Guthrie County, all right? In Guthrie County, Texas, with the 4 Sixes, it was basically the whole county. It's the county square, it's the town. They took over the kids' food programs. It was all from the ranch. They gave the food program to the ranch. That ranch was able to get that school system, that independent school system. They improved attendance, health, everything across the board improved because of that local community fed their local independent school district. Okay, now let's look at what they're doing in New York. And before he made those announcements, I believe it was at the beginning of the year, I think February or March, and we're talking about one of the bills that, the administration passed. And I said, watch out, they're going to come after the food systems for the school systems. That in New York is exactly what they're doing. They're injecting these new fake commodity ideas, and then they'll inject it into the food system of our children.
Governor Abbott has taken a bunch of migrants and bust them to New York. I'm surprised that you guys aren't sending some meat up there as well as a way to kind of drop off.
Like I said, we're about to feed a nation again.
Well, when we speak about kids, I think one of the hot topics in society in general today is China and things like TikTok and kind of how they're a large consumption percentage from just like a psychological perspective of children. But China also has been buying up a lot of farmland in the United States. What do you read into that? Is that just a country trying to make money? Is there other things people should be aware of or concerned about?
Well, you look at China, and they're the most populous country in the world. They have a lot of people to feed, and their consumption is different. But their elites eat a lot of our beef. They do. I mean, that's what they have to eat. And whenever I say there's an attack on beef, and everybody needs to understand that, it's like you and I are the peasants, right? Modern day peasants. Now, we're the ones that don't have that market access. Peasants don't have market access. They're not getting rid of beef. They're just not going to give you access to it. So they're going to turn beef into caviar for the average consumer in the United States. That's their intentions. And there's already 70% of the population across the globe that are saying, we're cutting back on our meat, because they don't even include it within inflation. Okay, we look at China that's trying to feed their nation, right? Well, they control a lot of grain in the world on the market, on the global market. Okay, well, they really are dependent on a global food industry. So how do they circumvent around that? Well, you go to the breadbasket of the world, which is basically the Great Plains, middle America, right? And so what they've been doing during COVID, they bought over 200,000 acres of farmland that nobody was paying attention to, because everybody was looking at Gates. What is Gates doing? Well, China kind of flew under the radar and was able to acquire a lot of our land. And they're bringing a lot of different type of technologies, and they're making a lot of plays on how food is basically probably consumed in their nation, but also by owning on our farmland, they get to control how we consume and what we consume as well. So what they're doing is they're basically creating a whole new Silk Road of food distribution within the United States itself.
And when we see this, what are the things you're most worried about? Is it things that they are doing to American farmland to feed themselves, and so we want to be careful as to what they're doing to the farmland itself? Or is it things that they're doing to the farmland, which ultimately leads to the food supply, and then that food is then given to the American public? Like, where are you most concerned?
Right now, what I'm concerned about in the United States of America, let's start with the United States of America, is that the lack of market access that we truly have in the United States is far worse than people understand. I just drove 14,000 miles across the South, and that's kind of, I'm going to go hit the Northwest. I'm hitting Idaho, Wyoming. I'm traveling around the world right now is what I'm doing. But get back to the point, I see tons of food deserts in the United States that are feeding communities. There's a lot of times all you find in a community is a convenience store and a Dollar General or a Walmart within 70 to 100 miles. That's our food distribution in the United States right now, and people don't realize it because they're not going out and seeing this country anymore. So when we look at the United States, they can basically fabricate, and this is something that I believe is going to happen in the United States, is there's going to be a short-term food supply shortage. It's not because we don't have access, or we don't have enough food. We don't have access to food. Because,
is that like a famine, or
well, there's going to be famines moving forward.
Okay, explain that.
Well, right now we're basically, there was a fertilizer shortage, a prohibition against fertilizer, and this is part of the global movement. This big global industrial food shift that I've been talking about. This has been planned for a while, and so what we've done is there's a nitrogen shortage, fertilizer shortage. You have fertilizer shortage. You have a grain shortage. You have a war in Ukraine and Russia. Well, guess who creates 33% of the global grain? Russia and Ukraine. Reason that basically I think that Russia is not having luck is because Ukraine owns a lot of that wheat, a lot of that grain. So you're having a global basically shortage of grain that plays out over time. If you don't have grain, you don't feed livestock, you don't feed people. So what happens with that, and you look at the history of man, if you have a pandemic, what else comes with the pandemic? A famine. What comes with the famine? Migration. So I see what's about to take place is we're going to have a famine that causes migration. Where that starts, I don't know. Is the famine going to be in Africa? Probably. Is it going to be in Asia? Possibly. And once that happens, you're going to start seeing migration happening to Europe again.
So when something like this plays out, it's kind of like monetary policy in the economy a little bit. Like we have high inflation right now, right? Highest has been in 40 years. Why? Well, monetary policy pretty big part of it.
Yeah.
There's also supply chain disruptions, government mandated lockdowns, the geopolitical conflicts. Like there's multiple things that feed into it. If we see famine anywhere in the world, multiple things that feed into it. Some of it is what I'll call kind of more the macro trends around the way the food's been treated, seeds, and a lot of things we've been talking about. Some of it's also just like fertilizer shortage, right? And then also some of it seems to be if you're not able to actually have the wheat harvest or the grain harvest that you normally would in Russia and Ukraine,
right?
Then you can't export it. And if you can't export it, then there's a shortage and it just throws the whole system kind of out of whack.
Right.
The positive side of that is if it occurs, hopefully we can get back on track after 1 or 2 seasons and kind of everything will be okay. But that remains kind of an open question of like how bad is the pain, it seems like, in the short term, and then how quickly can we get back on track once some of these issues are solved?
Yeah, and that's a really good way to look at that. That's a good breakdown because a lot of people think everything's instantaneous. We live in the high time preference way in which we think. Whenever you have that grain shortage, that takes time to play out. And so it's not automatically seen. And so you'll see touch points of things that are not available anymore, and by saying that, it's like, okay, whenever I was on harvest, I quit harvest early last year. I said, I got to start writing this because I knew there was going to be a grain shortage this year. I knew that this was coming down. So I wanted to get the message out there because all of the ranchers that I spoke to in the very beginning, especially said, we have to make this happen in 2022. We have to get people aware now so they can basically be prepared. I think us as Americans, above and beyond anybody, has a way that we can empower ourselves right now. During times of mass prohibition, there should be times of mass innovation. And I think that's what we're positioned to do as far as the beef initiative and the ranchers that have come on board. We're giving that option. We're not thinking about food insecurity right now. Everybody that's come through the beef initiative as far as a producer rancher, they're thriving right now because that consumer demand is being changed. And I haven't talked about the beef initiative and how much beef we're selling. Because you got to look at volume. What can you supply? I don't want to go out there and LARP and say, hey, look at me, look at me. It's not about likes. I grew my Twitter channel in Bitcoin Twitter, and I did it very slowly because every bit of my growth was dependent on what we could supply to the consumer. And now that we have the processing centers, our volume is increasing tenfold. Well, now here we are talking. And that way I can control what we can supply. And I'm very confident now that we can supply to, like I say, 10 times more than we were in the beginning.
So how does it work? People show up and they say, hey, I want healthy beef where I know where it came from. And you all are essentially aggregating suppliers and producers and saying, we can provide you access, kind of this market access, right, to the beef itself. What
had happened, let's talk about Bitcoin, and the beef initiative, and I tell this to everybody, the beef initiative basically is the most firm stance in integrity that you can find in beef right now in the United States and in the world. And if you don't believe me, just try me. We've put a lot of time into that. It is about integrity of food. And this is the number one thing that we have to look at. So by saying that, we've built out the technology stack. And I always wanted to give the option of you can buy in fiat or you can buy in Bitcoin. And so what that took was educating ranchers and everything. Cole Bolton was one of the first ones we approached, like I said before. And he'd kind of dabbled in Bitcoin a little bit. But we built out our technology stack and we've developed these really good relationships with Oshi, with IBEX. We used OpenNode. And, we used everything that's out there right now. Man, our technology stack is foolproof right now. It's doing really well. And so by doing that, you can go to the beef initiative right now in 48 states in the United States, and you can buy boxes of beef. By saying that, well, you can also go to Oshi, and if you're in Texas or a surrounding state, you can buy a half a cow or a quarter of a cow. So you can basically source your beef right now through the beef initiative anywhere in the United States. Okay, that's our major supplier is Cole Bolton of K&C Cattle. Okay, you get Jason out there in Colorado. Well, he's part of the beef initiative too. He just likes to do the western slope of Colorado. And so everybody realizes that when they go find him in the beef initiative because they can search for him under the producers. Well, people that are local to him, well, they're buying from him. And now we're bringing in Holy Cow of West Texas. They do grass-fed and grass-finished. Now we're going to go into a subscription model to where every month you can go through there and you can basically have a box shipped to you. You can, from Cole Bolton of K&C Cattle, Holy Cow, outside of Lubbock, Texas, and then we're bringing in somebody from Western Colorado, Scott Hawk of Sacred Farms. So yeah, the producers are coming in and we're giving them that technology stack where they can accept fiat or Bitcoin. And so by doing that, we have over, I think, 50 to 60 producers that are listed in the platform under producers. Well, now we're going to start hitting every one of those states, and we're going to let them do the case study that we did with Cole Bolton. Now we can do it in Washington State, we can do it in Florida, we can do it in Maine, California, and all these producers get to come in. Cole gets to look at Texas again. And then all these other producers get to start serving their communities like they want to. That way we have a lot of different options. Maybe you do want to get your beef from Texas. You have that option. Maybe you want to get it from Florida, where you're going to have that option. And so as, I spread the word, the producers are coming in. I go meet with them and I see what their protocol is. Does it match the Beef Initiative standards? Our standard is far better than the USDA stamp. USDA stamp can say, yeah, we're the USDA. Well, so what? I don't care. We're the Beef Initiative. And I'll talk to anybody about how we raise and steward and process and deliver beef. And it's the standard to be.
Will you guys start to put stickers on stuff? So that
we will. There's a process that you go through that because we have to play by the rules, right? And we want to know the law better than the law knows itself. So at one point in time, the Beef Initiative will have a stamp. Yeah.
And you can put that on and people can look for not only the USDA, but also they can look for
now it's more of a state of mind. It's a marketing thing in a way that's, kind of grassroots marketing, kind of information exchange that builds some trust. But over a period of time, we'll say, we are the brand here. You can trust us. And people will go, hell yeah, man, that's the Beef Initiative.
Yeah. When we think about a lot of the food supply, one of the last things I want to talk about is the testosterone levels in men have fallen off a cliff.
Yeah.
The latest stats that I've seen are somebody born in 2020 has about 50% of the testosterone of someone born in 2000. 20-year kind of difference, 50% drop in testosterone. How much of that is just pure food versus other things, you think?
Well, it's let's start off by saying this. Your skin is your second stomach. Okay. You look at that and you look at things like plastics, phthalates, and you look at hormones in children, and you look at delivery of minerals and vitamins, and you look what your skin basically takes in. How many people go through and take a shower and, soap and shampoo with all kinds of chemicals before they ever even eat anything? Okay. And you look at children, what do they eat? Well, they're first, maybe they took a shower last night or they took a shower this morning. Well, they already got all those chemicals. Their skin's already basically digesting everything and has to go through their blood systems. Well, now they're eating food now that has no protein in it. That's what's dropping these testosterone levels. And going back to the doctors that I do work with, and this is not one doctor. Everybody that's come through the Beef Initiative because of what we're doing, because we're basing nutrition to kids, is they're saying that, yeah, most teenagers now, their testosterone levels, to your point, is around 200. It should be about 12 to 1,400. Okay. And
that is insane.
It's destroying a generation of young men is what it's doing. And you look at the children, but now let's look at teenagers, let's look at guys in their 20s. They don't have the testosterone in me. They don't. And they don't know why. If you go to a doctor and say, test my testosterone, that doctor is going to say, why? Why do you want your testosterone checked? And you look back at the social engineering, oh, well, that's masculinity. Oh, that's testosterone is rage, and they talk about that all the time, And so part of it is social engineering, people not understanding how important testosterone level is and how dangerous it is to engineer a decrease in hormone levels in children, from testosterone to estrogen. Whenever you're having little boys come in and they're basically having estrogen and they're growing breast, and they should not be growing breast. They're not going into puberty when they should be going into puberty. And you look at the manipulation and the engineering of of the delivery of the minerals and vitamins and everything that should be okay as a society that we should be paying attention to, we're not paying attention to it. And parents don't know how to pay attention to it. And when they do try to pay attention to it, centralized media basically makes it a non-issue when it's one of the biggest issues you have.
Yeah. And when you think of the testosterone, is that water play into it as well? Like that's one of the big things I hear is, I drink a lot of liquids out of water bottles, and there are people, that's one of the big things that they push on. And I'm like, oh shit, maybe I should stop doing that. Like, how do you think about water versus just the proteins and animal proteins and stuff like that?
I think, of course, water is the substance of life. I fast a lot. One time I did a 10-day fast. I can go 10 days without eating. Can I go 10 days without water? No. So I look at it, to your question, is I think it's hand in hand. It really is. Having clean water is basically just top of mind just as much as protein is. And that's what that's how I live. And of course we shouldn't be drinking out of plastic bottles, right? Yeah. But we do the best we can right now. And you ease into, but that the water consumption and the flow of the body is extremely important because it cleanses. But then again, the plastics in which we do expose ourselves to does end up that we have to process that too. Yeah. So if you're consuming a lot of shit food, there's a lot of plastics in our food now. There's a lot of glyphosate in our food. There's so many chemicals in our food that the one thing that you should do is I do a 48-hour bone broth fast.
Okay, what is that?
What it is you get a grass-fed beef, grass-finished beef, and you basically make a bone broth out of that. And then you do I call it a reset. Okay. And what you do is you only consume water and bone broth for like 48 hours. Well, it gives your system a reset. You get to say, whoa, hold up here. I'm going to clear up my mind a little bit. I'm going to clear up my body a little bit, and I'm going to flush it out. I'm going to flush it out with water, and then I'm going to deliver pure animal protein and nutrition through bone broth. If you look at and you dissect a cow down and you look how valuable the bone is, the marrow, everything within the cow that we as people do not understand anymore, what you're going to do is you're going to give your body a reset. It's going to give your mind a break. Once again, referring back to doctors, some functional medicine doctors especially, they're telling their parents, their patients, I'm not going to talk to you until you do a 48-hour bone broth fast, because what you have right now, a lot of people's brains are inflamed. They're inflamed by eating overly processed food, seed oils, high fructose corn syrup. You have children coming into the doctors as well with fatty liver disease that used to be a problem of a man that drank all of his life in his 70s. Now we have children 5 to 11 that are coming in and need liver transplants because of high fructose corn syrup, because of seed oils, because of everything that we're feeding them. And of course, they're not drinking enough water and they're getting too much of those pesticides, those plastics and everything. So we have to look like we have to become our own filters.
Yeah. We've been talking today. Obviously, the Beef Initiative is very focused on delivering animal proteins and making sure that it's the healthiest possible. Somebody who's blown up on the internet recently is Liver King. What are your take on this guy who's eaten bone marrow and livers and looks like a Herculean statue? Says it's all natural. What's your general take?
It's 100% natural, man. That guy will go out there, and he will eat a full liver that's raw, and he'll eat it from a grass-fed, grass-finished cow. And what he's doing, I don't want to say it's overreach. Well, it's overstep for a lot of people, but I see what his point is. It's like, this is where you get your power from. He does. He looks freakishly, big and built and just everything about him. But what he's making a statement of is that he knows what vitamins and minerals are. He's making you look at him and he's saying, I eat bones. This is where the minerals are, and you need to pay attention. It's not in that box of cereal that says it's loaded with vitamins and minerals, but all it is sugar. So he's making a statement on that level. But if you go through, I have never met, not one time in my life, somebody that eats like he does or close to that has health problems And that is basically, somebody that suffers from being overfed and nutritionally starved. Everybody that you look that basically has a consumption model based on his extremities, basically, his extremes, you're going to find people that are much more clear in the mind, much more clear in the body, much more clear in their spirit. It's just something that you do notice. I think that's what he's trying to make a point of.
Yeah.
He probably didn't start out like that, but his success lies in his communication and his representation.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Can you overeat meat?
Yeah, your body's only going to digest so much protein. It'll extract the rest.
Yeah. Well, I guess part of it is if you think of people being fat, right? It's because they eat more calories than they burn.
Right.
To some degree, I think with meat, most people say like you eat enough, and your body just says, "Hey, no more."
Yeah, we're fine.
Right. And it almost prevents you from overeating in the way that if you're eating kind of empty calories, for example. It does feel like that it's much harder, I guess, to become obese if your body just literally won't let you consume more calories because it's satiated.
Yeah. Well, you eat pure animal protein. You're going to have to digest less. What are you doing? Well, it's mostly just vitamins and minerals. There's not a lot of, impurities in that. And so your body will say, hey, cool, we're good. I'm getting energy from what you're feeding me. I'm going to let you know whenever you don't have to eat as much, right? Whenever you're eating heavily processed food and all those chemicals that we talked about, all the different ingredients, the fake commodities, everything in that food, doesn't matter what the package says. Mostly with our consumption models in our food industry right now, you're having to eat every 4 hours. You look at how we've marketed and everything since the food pyramid, let's say, the pizza. You're eating pizza, you're eating the best food in the world. You got everything. You got all the food groups. Well, what that has led us to be is basically our bodies are starving. Okay, we're overfed and undernourished. Okay, we're nutritionally starved in a way. By being overfed, what we mean is we're consuming so much food that our bodies don't know what to do with that. What we're consuming. What does your body do with something that it doesn't know what to do with? It turns it into a fat cell for defense. And so what we're doing, that's how we're getting on this, basically this roadmap of, obesity, which we are as a nation and the world is turning into, is because our bodies don't know when to say, our minds don't know when to say stop. Because we're basically feeding it something that's not working out. It's like, man, this is not this. And people, you look at food now as a drug. Okay, food is medicine, medicine is food. Okay, you look at it like that. Well, now food, the way that we consume it, as far as the industrial food complex, it's nothing more than a drug. Okay, my father was a counselor for 25 years on chemical dependency. So I've always talked to him about that. And we look at food now, and you look at somebody that tries to go through a fast like that, and they haven't eaten in 8 hours, and they're used to eating every 4 hours. They're used to getting that snack, whatever that snack is. They're always consuming. It's never stopping. Well, you get that same person, and you say, stop. Okay, well, they're going to go through a form of being an alcoholic, is it whenever you get off of alcohol and you're a true alcoholic, you're going through a detox. Well, alcohol is nothing more than sugar. Okay, you look at our food consumption now in the United States of America, heavily processed. Most of it is just sugar. So you get somebody that's used to eating that consumption model. They're going through a form of detox that is scary to them, and they don't feel right. What is their comfort? Go back to the source, just like an addict does. And so we've turned food into such a powerful drug that a lot of people don't understand it, nor basically do they want to even go there because they have to look in that accountability mirror.
Yeah. And it literally just comes down to you are putting things in your body, whether it's medicine or food, right? Your body's going to react. And I think that your macro point around just the food intelligence, people don't know what they're putting in their bodies, right?
Even if they're good and they have good intentions, man. And that's why I always tell people, this is not a judgment, man. We're all victims of it. We all eat like crap at times. We have in our lives. Man, we're all in this together, man. This is not something pointing at you saying you're doing the wrong diet program. Keto over paleo or vegan over vegetarianism. It's the beef initiative because I'm from freaking Texas, man. You know, but what it's really about is pure food again. And if we can look at that and say, man, that's all I really need to do. I don't need to get on this 12-month diet program that starts on January 2nd. We're going to have that day extra where I have to really think about it and then kick in. And then, here I am eating donuts again on February 2nd. So we don't have to play that game anymore. What you have to do is basically be intentional, saying, man, I'm just going to get back to some pure food again, and I'm going to take a different route this time.
I usually eat pretty healthy, but I'm going to admit to you, I had a cookie last night.
Did you?
I saw it. I said, that shit looks
Did you
good,
feel
man.
guilty?
Hell yeah. And I knew that. I was like, man, I'm eating unhealthy, but like whatever, right? And I do think everyone does it.
It does.
Right?
Of course, man.
You can't eat
Think how
perfectly.
guilty I feel when I eat some ice cream, man. I was like, man, somebody's looking at my ass.
But I do believe that there's plenty of fads and diets.
Sure.
Like all this stuff is everyone's looking for the shortcut.
Yeah.
But the overall message of just one, understanding what you're putting in your body, but also two, just eating real food.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if you just start there, like just eat real food, not the processed stuff.
100%.
For most people, that's a pretty big improvement.
It really is. And like I said, when I first started writing about this, I said, man, this is daunting. Where do you start? And a lot of people start midstream of trying to make change. What I'm asking people is get down to the source of the seed of the solution. But first, you have to understand the source of the seed of the issue. And there's so many things that we can talk about. And what you just said made me think about the first conversation I had with Cole. And everybody's like, oh, your beef is too expensive. You want to bet? Guess what? Our beef is just basically less expensive than the supermarket is right now, or the same price. But the value, okay, let's talk about the value. Of course, it's going to be the taste. Of course, it's going to be the nutrition, everything else. What is the value of that purchase, of having that market access and that consumption? Well, your medical bills go down, your insurance changes. That's what the ranchers want people to know. It's like, hey, you don't have to look at it this way. Perception is your reality. Well, your perception needs to change about buying pure animal protein in a different way. If you're going to compare somebody like Cole Bolton or Jason Rick or Justin Trammell to the supermarket, you've already lost, man. It's apples and oranges, right? You can't make that comparison. And what you need to do is really understand that your beef that you're getting delivered to your doorstep is basically in line with the pricing models of you basically going down to your local supermarket now, because how they are manipulating the beef industry to where you, the consumer, and the rancher are the ones that are paying the prices.
My takeaways from today are eat real food, know what you put in your body, and when you go to the grocery store, stay on the outside. Don't go in. Don't go inside. Right?
Yeah.
Feel like that's a pretty good takeaway for most people.
Yeah. And, I have to say, it's like, go to freaking beefinitiative.com, man. Seriously.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, where can we send people? If people want to learn more about kind of what they're eating and all that, or if they want to actually order healthier beef and go right to the ranchers, where should we send them?
Well, what I tell everybody, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. What I'm pushing right now, because, it's time. We're ready to go into fall, especially because I think there will be some food insecurity in this nation, is like develop your market access. The best place to start is through the Beef Initiative right now. People will say, well, what about places like Butcher Box or Whole Foods? It's not the same, man. It's not the same beef. It's not aged. I mean, everything about it. We are basically right now, the type of capacity that we have and what we can provide as far as that pure animal protein, just beefinitiative.com, and you can purchase your boxes through us. You know that the rancher, me now, everything that you have a new market access for, your consumption model. That's the best place to start.
So beefinitiative.com.
Okay. And then if you don't want to buy from us, then do a search on our producer page. Say, hey, I got these guys in Missouri. I got this person I found, in Idaho. We've got them basically coming in from every state and say, hey, man, they're right down the road from me. And so what we're doing with the Beef Initiative, we're building communities, what we're trying to do. We want every community now. That's how we win this game. We don't do it with a $300 or a $600 million processing center that's owned by the producers. No, we go through there and we establish a processing center and a market demand and a consumer demand on a community-based level.
Yeah.
And that's what we're having a lot of success, and it really is taking shape.
Absolutely. Where can we send people to find you if they want to either talk to you more about some of this stuff or they just want to follow along as you keep building this?
Well, we have a lot of touch points now. We've created a new media company that we're going to do an audio docu-series. On Twitter, that's at TX Slim Media. And then, of course, my Substack, which started it all, is texasslim.substack.com. That's where I sent you. And that's where you can read from the very beginning as far as the harvest of deception.
I read it twice.
Did you?
Well, I read the first time and I said, hey, I got to go back. There's a lot in there.
Right, there is.
And then your Twitter account?
Yeah, it's at Modern Tea Man. And then, of course, we have the Beef Initiative, which is at Beef Initiative. And one thing I want to point out is, doing these, I call them a summit now. We're having our next one at White Oak Pastures that I spoke of, and it's September 16th through 17th and 18th. We have Will Harris himself. We have Adam Curry that's going to be speaking there. We have a Heritage Woman series. We have the ranchers coming in. We have Bitcoiners that are going to be speaking. Matt Odell and several other Bitcoiners spoke. So we're giving education across the board. There are interactive conferences, events, and now it's basically a food intelligence summit is what it is. So we're only selling 100 tickets, and we want people to show up. And we've had basically that many people, and whenever they leave these summits, their lives are changing. And so that's how we're growing is because it's grassroots.
Yeah.
And, it's happening. So you can go to the beefinitiative.com website, and you can look at that, and you can buy your tickets there as well. We're going to have more of these summits. Now we're going to have 2 in Australia. I'm heading to Australia the end of January.
Okay.
This is just not a Texas thing. This is just not a national. This is a global thing. We're going to have a headquarters in Tennessee and Nashville there at Bitcoin Park. We've got a headquarters in Colorado out at Rick's Ranches. We have a headquarters in Canyon, Texas, and then down there at the processing center south of Austin. We're building out these nodes. We're building nodes, and we're building beef nodes. And everywhere we go building a beef node, is it going to be a Bitcoin node? And, it's happening naturally. It's happening open source. We're crowdsourcing. We're crowdfunding. And, everybody's coming in and they're starting to realize this isn't some stupid fiat marketing plan, man. It really isn't. This is something that is grassroots. It really is. That's what's been exciting about this is that how much the Bitcoin community has caught on, how much the ranching community has caught on. You get a Bitcoiner, what we say is the Bitcoiners are going to orange pill the ranchers. The ranchers are ranch pilling the Bitcoiners.
That's great, though.
It is, though. It's a perfect balance because you show up at one of these summits, there's no strangers. Everybody gets along and they're all talking and they're all making these relationships. And man, I'm going to go up to Idaho. I'm going up to Wyoming after the Georgia summit. And then, like I said, I'm going to Australia. I'm in talks with, talking with the U.S. Cattlemen's Association right now. This is happening and we're going to punch forward really hard right now.
I love it. Well, Texas Slim, I appreciate the conversation. I learned a bunch today, and we'll definitely do it again in the future.
Pomp, thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.